Hey there, tonight we're diving into the gritty reality of a medieval hospital, where the truth is that the cure might be scarier than the illness itself. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone. Perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. As you shuffle into the medieval hospital that's doubling as a local monastery this fine morning, you might be struck by the peculiar smell. Is it the damp stone walls, the musty rushes on the floor, or the pungent mix of incense and herbal concoctions? Probably a concoction of all three, with a side of unwashed humanity thrown in for good measure. Welcome to your medieval healthcare experience, where cleanliness is a concept still waiting to be invented, and pain management involves a lot of praying. Here's the deal. Monasteries were the OG medical centers of medieval Europe. They weren't just places for monks to chant and contemplate. They were the closest thing people had to a hospital. But don't expect to see a white coat or a stethoscope. Monasteries were more about the soul than the science. If you're hoping for a professional doctor, you're fresh out of luck. Instead, you're in the capable hands of monks who have more experience with scripture than sutures. The 12th century monk and chronicler Orderic Vitalis noted that these holy men had to get creative, often relying on divine intervention alongside their primitive medical skills. Morning routines here are less about rounds and more about rituals. You'll likely start your day with a dose of mass, hoping the divine will be on your side for whatever ailment you're nursing. After all, without anesthesia, your best bet to dull the pain might just be a fervent Hail Mary. Speaking of anesthesia, forget about it. The only knockout punch you're getting is from a heavy hand of ale if you're lucky. Otherwise, brace yourself for some good old-fashioned suffering, because in the medieval mind, pain was not just a symptom, it was a spiritual trial. Now, before you write off these monks as quacks, consider this. They were doing the best they could with what they had. Medieval Europe didn't boast a robust pharmacopoeia or a plethora of medical schools. The University of Bologna, which opened in 1088, was one of the first to offer medical instruction, but such institutions were rare and often reserved for the elite. Meanwhile, your average monk was more likely to have a collection of herbal remedies than a degree. Herbal medicine was the go-to treatment option, with monks cultivating their own gardens of medicinal plants. Might come across some familiar names: sage, lavender, rosemary, though they're more likely to be used in a salve than a stew. While modern science might scoff at these remedies, a few were surprisingly effective, if only by accident. Willow bark, for instance, contains salicin, a precursor to aspirin. But let's not get too carried away with the romantic notion of herbal cures. They were a mixed bag at best, and your ailment might just get the let's see what happens treatment. Of course, this whole setup wasn't just about patching people up. The church had a vested interest in maintaining social order, and part of that involved keeping people healthy enough to pay their tithes and stay out of trouble. Your health was a matter of spiritual and economic interest, even if the methods were questionable. But why were monasteries the ones playing doctor in the first place? It all boils down to a combination of religious, social, and economic factors. The Roman Empire's collapse left a vacuum in the infrastructure that once supported organized medical care. Monasteries, with their resources and networks, filled the gap, providing a semblance of healthcare. They became repositories of knowledge, transcribing medical texts and preserving what little science remained. So here you are, navigating a morning in a medieval hospital, where the lines between faith and medicine are as blurred as the vision of a patient who's had too much hemlock. The lack of professional doctors might seem absurd, but this was a time when the average life expectancy was about 35 years, and surviving childhood was an achievement. You didn't just get sick, you got tested. By God, by nature, and by the limits of medieval medicine. And speaking of limits, let's not forget about how they dealt with surgery back then. Without anesthesia, operations were a last resort, performed with the speed of a Formula One pit stop. The faster, the better, because no one wanted to be the patient who screamed loud enough to wake the saints. In fact, medieval surgical manuals advised practitioners to work quickly to minimize the patient's agony, though let's be honest, It was probably more about sparing the monk the sound of anguished cries. Now, I know what you're thinking. Where's the glamour in all this? The truth is, medieval hospitals weren't the romantic havens of healing that some might imagine. They were rough, rudimentary, and often downright dangerous. Yet they were a crucial part of the fabric of medieval society, offering what little solace they could to the sick and suffering. As the sun rises higher, casting its light through the stained glass windows, you might be pondering how anyone managed to survive. The answer is resilience, of the human body, of the spirit, and of the medieval healthcare system itself. It wasn't pretty, but it was all they had. And as you move through this day, you'll come to realize that even the harshest realities of history have their own strange beauty. So, get ready to spend your day in a world where medical science and superstition walk hand in hand, where the past's harsh truths sit uncomfortably alongside its myths. Because if nothing else, this glimpse into medieval medicine is a reminder of just how far we've come, and how much we owe to those who dared to heal with little more than faith and a handful of herbs. Now, speaking of harsh truths, let's chat about the economics of medieval healthcare, because nothing screams fun like medieval financial woes. If you thought your modern hospital bill was a shocker, wait until you hear about the medieval setup. Remember, this was an era when the average laborer made about a penny a day, and that was on a good run. So, if you found yourself needing medical attention, you were in for a financial roller coaster that made modern insurance look like a walk in the park. First off, let's talk costs. While the monasteries technically didn't charge for their services, and I use that term loosely, the reality was a bit more complicated. You see, getting yourself admitted into one of these holy healthcare hubs often involved making a donation. And by donation, I mean the medieval equivalent of an entry fee. It was like a cover charge at a club, except instead of a DJ, you got Brother Matthew with a mortar and pestle. The richer you were, the more generous your donation was expected to be. And if you were dirt poor, well, good luck. Charity was supposed to cover you, but let's just say it was more of a lucky draw than a guaranteed safety net. Now, if you were a noble with a chest of silver coins, you might have a slightly easier time getting care, assuming the monks didn't decide that your ailment was a divine punishment for your excessive wealth. The irony here is thicker than a medieval gruel. The wealthier you were, the more likely your illness might be viewed as a moral failing. Isn't that a twist? The societal view of illness was often tangled up with morality. You weren't just sick, you were potentially sinful, and that made treatment a matter of spiritual as well as physical urgency. But let's not forget the delightful class distinctions. If you were a peasant, you'd be lucky if the monks even glanced your way. Your treatment might consist of a quick prayer and a swig of whatever herbal brew they had on hand. The wealthy, however, might get the medieval equivalent of a private room, or at least a less crowded corner of the infirmary. They could expect more personalized care, which might include the luxury of having a monk actually stick around to see if you survived the night. Now, what about the families of the patients? Well, they often had to bear the brunt of the financial burden. If you were the breadwinner laid up with a fever, your family's livelihood was on the line. It wasn't just your health at stake, it was survival of the entire household. Families sometimes had to sell possessions or land to afford the donation that might secure a loved one's spot in the hospital. It was a harsh reminder that in the medieval world, illness was not just a personal tragedy, but an economic catastrophe. And let's talk about charity for a moment. It's easy to romanticize the idea of monastic charity, but the reality was far from idyllic. Yes, monasteries were obligated to care for the poor, but their resources were limited, and the demand was high. Charity was often a matter of public relations as much as piety. A monastery that turned away the needy risked losing its reputation, and with it, the donations that kept its doors open. So, while charity did exist, it was more of a precarious balancing act than an open-armed embrace. In many ways, navigating medieval healthcare was like threading a needle in the dark. You had to balance social standing, financial resources, and a hefty dose of luck. And even if you managed to secure a spot in the infirmary, there was no guarantee of recovery. The odds were stacked against you, both medically and economically. It makes one appreciate the modern marvels of antibiotics and health insurance, doesn't it? Now, don't get too nostalgic for the days of yore. While we love a good story about the chivalry of knights, and the nobility of medieval life, the truth was often grittier and grimmer. The medieval hospital experience wasn't just about healing. It was a microcosm of the time's social and economic realities. The rich, the poor, the pious, and the pragmatic all collided in a mix of charity, commerce, and care that was as unpredictable as it was essential. So, as you ponder the economic intricacies of medieval medicine, remember that this was a world where every cough could be a catastrophe and every visit to the infirmary a gamble. It's a testament to human resilience that so many managed to survive, and perhaps even thrive, in such a challenging environment. As we continue this journey, keep in mind that the medieval hospital was more than a place of healing. It was a mirror reflecting the complexities of its society. And like any good mirror, it showed both the beauty and the blemishes, leaving us with a clearer picture of a world that was as fascinating as it was flawed. As the afternoon sun drapes its golden light over the medieval infirmary, you might think you've wandered onto the set of a bizarre medical drama. But here, the plot thickens not with scandalous romances or miraculous recoveries, but with the humoral theory and a side of superstition. So, strap in as we dive into the wacky world of medieval medical procedures, where leeches were the stars and blood was the currency of health. Let's start with bloodletting, the medieval answer to, well, just about everything. Got a headache? Bleed it out. Feeling feverish? Let the blood flow. Stubbed your toe? You guessed it, more bloodletting. The practice was rooted deeply in the humoral theory, a concept borrowed from the ancient Greeks. Like an unfortunate heirloom, no one really wanted, but everyone felt obligated to keep. Hippocrates and Galen were the rock stars of this school of thought, which held that the body was governed by 4 humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Health, they claimed, was all about balance, and the slightest tip of the scales meant it was time to grab the lancet. Now, to us modern folks, willingly parting with your blood might seem like medieval madness, but in the logic of the time, it was practically science. Bloodletting was believed to rebalance your humors, but in reality, it often left patients lightheaded, if not lifeless. Yet the practice persisted for centuries. Even the well-educated fell for it. The revered physician Guy de Chauliac, who penned the monumental Chirurgia Magna in the 1360s, was a fan. He included chapters on when and where to bleed patients, depending on astrological signs. Yes, that's right. Your zodiac sign might determine which vein got the medieval tap treatment. Of course, if you weren't up for a full-fledged bloodletting session, there was always leeching, a lesser but equally queasy evil. Leeches were the medieval version of a multi-tool used to draw blood without the need for a blade. These little suckers were harvested from marshes and kept in jars, ready to go to work at a moment's notice. A monk might slap a few on your skin and let them do their thing, a process that could last anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour, depending on how ravenous your leeches were feeling that day. And if you think leeches were only a medieval oddity, think again. They are still used in modern medicine for certain procedures, proving that some ancient practices aren't entirely without merit, just mostly. But let's not forget the delightful role astrology played in all this. In a world where the stars dictated everything from the best time to plant crops to the outcome of battles, it's no surprise they also meddled in medicine. Medieval physicians often consulted the heavens before making diagnoses. Got a cough? Better check if Mars is in retrograde. The influential medical text, The Canon of Medicine, by Avicenna, recommended aligning treatments with celestial movements. While we might chuckle at the thought of stargazing doctors, astrology gave people a sense of control in a chaotic world, a reassuring belief that the cosmos held the answers to their earthly ailments. Yet, for all its cosmic aspirations, medieval medicine was grounded in some pretty grim realities. Hygiene was hardly a priority, and infections were a common side effect of even the simplest procedures. The Regimen Sanitatis Salinitenum, a medieval health guide, advised cleanliness, but with resources limited. It was more of a suggestion than a rule. And with life expectancy hovering around 35 years, people were more concerned with surviving the day than fretting over germs they couldn't see. In this mix of faith and folly, science and superstition, it's easy to see how myths about medieval medicine have lingered. The idea of brave, if misguided, monks wielding leeches and lancets has its appeal, a romantic vision of a time when healing was as much about faith as it was about flesh. And while we can admire the earnestness with which medieval practitioners clung to their beliefs, it's clear that their understanding of the body was, shall we say, a work in progress. But that's what makes history so fascinating. It's a testament to human ingenuity, a reminder that even the most bizarre practices were born from a desire to heal and understand. So, here you are, spending your afternoon in a medieval hospital, where the air buzzes with the hum of prayers and the occasional yelp of a patient mid-bloodletting. It's a place where the lines between medicine and mysticism are as blurred as the stained glass windows casting colorful shadows on the stone floors. As you navigate this strange world, remember that every lancet prick and leech bite is a step in humanity's long journey toward modern medicine. It's a journey marked by trial and error, by the stubborn clinging to old ideas and the brave embrace of new ones. As the sun begins its descent, casting longer shadows through the infirmary, you might be pondering the resilience of those who lived through such times. The stories of medieval medicine are a mix of triumph and tragedy, of people doing their best with what they had, guided by the stars and their own unshakable beliefs. It's a reminder that while we've come a long way, the spirit of curiosity and the quest for knowledge remain as vital today as they were in the flickering candlelight of a medieval hospital. And with that, we leave the monks and their medical mysteries to continue our exploration of this fascinating era, where every day was a test of faith, resilience, and the limits of human understanding. And speaking of medieval healthcare's long, winding journey, let's shift gears to the real power players of the time. Wars, plagues, and the church. Yes, those heavy hitters did more than their fair share of dictating the course of medical care, often turning it into a circus of misfortune and muddling. If you thought medical practices were already a dicey business, wait until you add social upheaval and religious fervor to the mix. First, let's talk about wars. These weren't just opportunities for knights to show off their shiny armor. They were also prime time for the spread of diseases and a test of medieval medicine's meager capabilities. War injuries meant a surge in surgical procedures, often performed in the grubbiest conditions imaginable. Picture battlefield medics improvising with anything sharp at hand, and you've got a rough idea. Medieval wars were less about glory and more about gangrene. The 100 Years' War, 1337-1453, for instance, was a cathedral of carnage, with wounds that cried out for more than a monk's herbal poultice. Then there were those infamous plagues. The Black Death, which swept through Europe between 1347 and 1351, didn't just decimate the population. It sent the healthcare system into a tailspin, with a death toll of about 25 million, nearly a third of Europe's population at the time. Doctors were caught between a rock and a hard place. Few remedies existed, and the ones that did were about as effective as a paper shield in a rainstorm. In a world where the cause of disease was a mystery, the best you could hope for was surviving long enough to write a will. Meanwhile, the church loomed large over every aspect of life, including medicine. It wasn't just about saving souls, it was about maintaining control. The church's influence was so pervasive that it shaped medical practices, sometimes for better, often for worse. Hospitals were more about curing spiritual ailments than physical ones, and that made sense in a society where disease was often seen as divine retribution. No wonder the penitential prayer was considered a powerful prescription. And let's not forget the church's less charitable side, the witch hunts. Women healers, often midwives or herbalists, found themselves in the crosshairs. These women, who dared to wield knowledge passed down through generations, were sometimes accused of witchcraft, a convenient label for those who didn't fit the church's mold. Between the 15th and 18th centuries, tens of thousands were executed in Europe, many for the supposed crime of practicing medicine without church approval. Women in medicine, both sanctioned and unsanctioned, were the unsung heroes of the era. While men dominated the formal medical landscape, women often acted as the primary healthcare providers in their communities. They knew their herbs and potions like the back of their hand, and their practical knowledge often outstripped that of their male counterparts. In the shadows of monasteries and castles, these women healed the sick and birthed the next generation, even if they had to do so under the threat of persecution. But let's circle back to the church's role in all this. It's easy to romanticize the idea of monks diligently copying medical texts by candlelight, preserving ancient knowledge. And sure, they did that, but it was also about maintaining the status quo. The church was a gatekeeper of knowledge, deciding what was fit for public consumption. Anything that smacked of heresy was swiftly quashed, and that included some medical practices. In this convoluted web of power and piety, medicine was as much about control as healing. It was a high-stakes game of chess, with the human body as the board. The church's sway meant that medical practices were often steeped in ritual and dogma, with actual healing taking a back seat to the spiritual narrative. It's no wonder that superstition thrived in such fertile ground. And then there were the guilds, those medieval trade unions that added another layer of complexity. Physicians, surgeons, and apothecaries often belonged to different guilds, each jealously guarding their own territory. It was a bit like a medieval version of turf wars, with each group claiming superiority over the others. This rivalry didn't exactly foster collaboration, and it often left patients caught in the crossfire, wondering if they needed a poultice or a prayer. All of these factors combined to create a healthcare system that was as fragmented as it was flawed. It was a time when getting sick meant navigating a maze of religious rites, social expectations, and political maneuverings. The lines between healing and harm were blurred, and the average patient had to rely on a mix of luck, wealth, and divine favor to emerge unscathed. But despite the chaos, there were glimmers of progress. The University of Paris, for example, was a hub of medical innovation in the 13th and 14th centuries, where the seeds of modern medicine were planted amidst the fertile soil of scholasticism. Scholars like Henry de Monville and Guy de Chauliac pushed the boundaries of surgical knowledge, even if their methods would make a modern surgeon cringe. So, the next time you're sniffling over a cold or grumbling about a visit to the doctor, remember that medieval medicine was a different beast altogether. It was a dance of death and devotion, of knowledge and ignorance. And while the church and state often turned healthcare into a quagmire of dogma and control, the resilience of those who lived through such times is a testament to the human spirit's unyielding quest for healing. As the shadows lengthen and the day draws to a close, we leave the medieval hospital behind, a place where every ailment was a test of faith as much as medicine. We've only scratched the surface of this intricate tapestry, but fear not, there's more to explore. The journey through the twisted corridors of history is far from over, and the path ahead promises even more revelations about the fascinating world of medieval healthcare. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the myths and realities of a time that, for all its flaws, laid the groundwork for the medical marvels we enjoy today. As the medieval hospital's day draws to its inevitable close, you're left to reflect on the whirlpool of chaos and care you've just witnessed. It's like stepping out of a time machine, blinking in the fading light, wondering how anyone survived the medical mayhem of the Middle Ages. Yet, amidst the haze of herbal remedies and the clinking of rosary beads, there are glimmers of resilience and innovation that pierce through like shafts of sunlight in a gloomy cathedral. First, let's tip our hats to those monks, the unsung progenitors of healthcare. Sure, they might have confused a fever with divine wrath, but they also laid the groundwork for modern medical practice, albeit with a side of incense. These guys were the medieval equivalent of multitaskers, juggling the roles of spiritual guides, amateur botanists, and community caregivers. In a world where literacy was as rare as a unicorn sighting, monks preserved and transmitted medical knowledge. Copying texts like Galen's works by hand, that's dedication, and maybe a touch of carpal tunnel. Now, if you ever feel overwhelmed by the choices at your local pharmacy, consider the medieval patient's plight. They had willow bark or willow bark. Yet necessity, as they say, is the mother of invention. The medieval penchant for herbal remedies wasn't entirely misguided. While many were hit or miss, some concoctions contained active ingredients later validated by modern science. Their reliance on plants like belladonna and valerian for pain relief and sedation proved that even in the darkest of times, there was a flicker of scientific curiosity. And then there's the sheer human grit. Picture a world where a splinter could spell your doom and a cough could bring down a kingdom. The Black Death didn't just wipe out swaths of the population. It paved the way for social and economic shifts. With fewer mouths to feed, survivors found themselves in a position to demand better wages. a medieval version of the Great Resignation, if you will. The scarcity of laborers meant peasants could negotiate for more favorable working conditions, slowly chipping away at the rigid feudal structures. Now, let's have a little chuckle over the absurdity of medieval hygiene. Yes, the idea of bathing was about as popular as a Monday morning, but it wasn't for lack of trying. The Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanae suggested washing hands and face daily, a revolutionary thought for the time. And while public baths were eventually seen as sinful, because, of course, everything fun was, they were initially a staple of city life, a testament to the medieval attempt at cleanliness. As for our medieval surgeons, they were the adrenaline junkies of their day. With no anesthesia, they worked at lightning speed, often performing amputations in the time it takes to brew a cup of coffee. The famed French surgeon Henry de Monville advised his peers to be bold in cutting, which sounds more like a directive for a steakhouse chef, but was sage advice in those perilous times. Their techniques, while crude, laid the foundation for advancements in surgical practice. Mondeville's emphasis on observation and documentation hinted at the scientific revolution to come. But let's not get carried away romanticizing the past. For every step forward, there was a stumble back. Women, with their deep knowledge of herbs and healing, were often marginalized by the very structures that should have embraced them. As midwives and healers, they played crucial roles, yet were frequently vilified and accused of witchcraft. It's a grim reminder that progress is not always linear, and the path to enlightenment can be shadowed by ignorance and fear. Despite the grim realities, the medieval era was not without its small victories. The establishment of the House of God in Paris in the 7th century marked one of the earliest examples of institutional care, a precursor to modern hospitals. This and other medieval hospitals provided invaluable services, however flawed, and represented a growing recognition of communal responsibility for health. As you compare then and now, it's hard not to feel a sense of gratitude for the leaps and bounds achieved by medical science. Today's hospitals might be a labyrinth of insurance forms and waiting rooms, but they're also places where science reigns supreme, where antibiotics and MRIs have replaced leeches and astrology. Modern medicine, with its data-driven precision, owes a debt to those medieval pioneers who dared to heal with little more than faith and flora. In the end, the story of medieval medicine is a tapestry woven with threads of hope, hardship, and human ingenuity. It's a testament to the resilience of those who endured, a reminder that even in the darkest times, the human spirit strives to understand and overcome. As you tuck this knowledge away, perhaps into the recesses of your mind reserved for trivia night, take solace in how far we've come, and how those who came before us, with their primitive tools and profound will, laid the groundwork for the medical marvels we enjoy today. So, next time you pop an aspirin, raise a glass to the monks and midwives, the star-gazing doctors, and their astrological charts. For it's thanks to their trials and errors, their mix of magic and medicine, that we now have the luxury of pondering the past from the comfort of our antibiotic-laden present. Cheers to them, and to the enduring quest for healing that connects us all across the tapestry of time. The Zhou dynasty was like that over-ambitious friend who insists on hosting an epic party, but ends up with a trashed house and a massive credit card bill. Picture an imperial regime that lasted a mere 37 years, from 581 to 618 AD, yet managed to rack up more chaos than most dynasties do in centuries. But hey, at least they left us with the Grand Canal, China's answer to "let's build something so big, future generations will either thank us or curse our name." Spoiler alert, it was mostly the latter. Now, the Grand Canal is the kind of project that makes the pyramids look like a junior high science fair entry. Spanning over 100 miles, it was a monumental feat of engineering, and naturally, a colossal drain on the empire's resources. Imagine funneling enough labor and cash into a ditch that connects the Yellow and Yangtze rivers to rival the GDP of a small country. The Sui Emperor Yang, with his grand visions, seemed to think he was playing Sim City with an unlimited cheat code. Unfortunately, real life doesn't come with a reset button. Emperor Yang was a man with a penchant for audacious projects and a flair for disastrous outcomes. Under his rule, the Sui embarked on 3 disastrous military campaigns against Korea, all of which ended in spectacular failure. Talk about striking out. These campaigns weren't just military blunders. They were economic sinkholes, much like investing in a failed cryptocurrency. Thousands of troops perished, and the empire's coffers were drained faster than you can say, Bitcoin crash. Now, if draining the treasury wasn't enough, Yang's policies were about as popular as a tax audit. His grandiose projects demanded a steady stream of laborers, conscripted from the peasantry who, shockingly, didn't appreciate being worked to the bone while their fields lay fallow, who knew forcing people to abandon their livelihoods for back-breaking labor wouldn't win a popularity contest. The peasants, understandably, revolted. And when peasants revolt, they don't throw tea into a harbor, they topple dynasties. Enter Lai Yuan, a bureaucrat-turned-rebel with impeccable timing. Lai Yuan was not your typical power-hungry warlord. In fact, he seemed more like the kind of guy who accidentally gets promoted to CEO after the actual boss gets fired. As the Sui dynasty crumbled under its own weight, Lai Yuan saw an opportunity. With the empire in chaos, he raised an army, not out of personal ambition, but out of necessity to restore order. Talk about a reluctant hero. In 617 AD, Lai Yuan, leveraging his connections and a healthy dose of luck, took the imperial capital, Chang'an. By 618 AD, Emperor Yang was dead, not due to some epic battle, but because his own advisors thought his leadership was a one-way ticket to ruin. With the Sui emperor out of the picture, Lai Yuan founded the Tang Dynasty, essentially hitting the reset button on a broken empire. Lai was like that savvy investor who buys a bankrupt company only to turn it into a gold mine. The Tang Dynasty wasn't just a new regime, it was a fresh start, a chance to rectify the spectacular blunders of its predecessor. Lai Yuan, now Emperor Geazu, was no fool. He knew keeping an empire together required more than just big ideas and bigger holes in the ground. It required balance, diplomacy, and a keen sense of when to stop digging, literally and figuratively. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Geazu's rise to power wasn't just a Game of Thrones. It was a lesson in political acumen and the power of timing. He wasn't some mythical hero riding in on a white horse. He was a pragmatic leader who understood that the key to a successful dynasty lay in listening to his people and avoiding the hubris that had doomed the Sui. In the wake of chaos, Tang Dynasty emerged not as a continuation of past mistakes, but as a beacon of what could be achieved when ambition met wisdom. So, as the curtain fell on the Sui's ill-fated reign, the Tang Dynasty rose from its ashes, promising a new era of prosperity and cultural flourishing. Lai Yuan may have been an accidental emperor, but his legacy would be anything but accidental. Stay tuned for the saga of the Tang, where emperors weren't just rulers. They were legends in the making. Now, remember how Lai Yuan was the accidental emperor who managed to turn chaos into opportunity. Well, he had a son, Lai Shimin, who wasn't about to let the family business go stale. If Lai Yuan was like the cautious investor who plays it safe, Lai Shimin was the ambitious startup founder ready to disrupt the market. And disrupt he did, in a palace coup so cutthroat it made the red wedding look like a child's birthday party. Lai Shimin, who would later be known as Emperor Taizong, was not content playing second fiddle. Sure, he was the son of the guy who had just founded the Tang Dynasty, but this was no time for nepotism or resting on the laurels of an accidental empire. In 626 AD, not satisfied with merely advising his father and older brother, Lai Jiansheng, Shimin decided to take matters, or rather, the throne, into his own hands. In what history has dubbed the Xuanwu Gate incident, Shimin ambushed and killed his brother and forced his father into early retirement. Talk about a hostile takeover. But before you start painting Shimin as the villain of this tale, let's give credit where it's due. Despite his ruthless rise to power, Shimin's reign was anything but a bloodthirsty dictatorship. Instead, he transformed the Tang Dynasty into one of history's most successful empires, with a little help from some political wizardry and military prowess. The man was a strategic genius, and he had his eyes set on expansion. One of the early highlights of Shimin's military campaigns was the Battle of Hulao in 621 AD, a decisive clash that solidified Tang dominance. Imagine a showdown with around 100,000 troops clashing near the Yellow River, where Shimin's strategic acumen outmaneuvered and outsmarted his rivals. Forget about dragons and direwolves. Shimin's real weapon was his mind, and he wielded it with deadly precision. The victory at Hulao didn't just expand the borders. It announced to the world that the Tang dynasty was here to stay, and it was playing for keeps. But Shimin wasn't just about swinging swords and playing war games. He had a knack for governance that would make modern CEOs take notes. The Tang administration was a beehive of activity, buzzing with reforms that streamlined everything from tax policies to bureaucracy. Shimin knew that managing an empire was a balancing act, and he wasn't about to let it all tip over because of a few bad policies. Take the tax system, for instance. It wasn't just about squeezing peasants dry. It was about creating a sustainable economy. The empire's tax policies were like a well-oiled machine, designed to ensure that the state had enough to throw a party while leaving enough on the table for the peasants to survive the hangover. The Tang's secret sauce was its equal field system, a land distribution model that aimed to ensure every farmer had enough land to be productive. It was like a medieval version of wealth redistribution, with a bit of benevolent despotism thrown in for good measure. And let's not forget the copper coins, those little discs of metal that jingled their way into the heart of the economy. By standardizing the currency, Shimin and his bureaucratic whizzes created a stable economic environment that encouraged trade and commerce. It wasn't just about making it rain copper. It was about ensuring that the economic gears were greased and ready to turn. This wasn't just a dynasty. It was a financial powerhouse. Of course, no empire is without its myths, and the Tang had its fair share. There's a romantic narrative that paints the Tang dynasty as a golden age of culture and prosperity, where poets and painters flourished under the benevolent gaze of enlightened emperors. And while there's truth to that story, the reality was far less idyllic. Behind the poetry and art was a complex web of power plays, economic strategies, and occasional bloodshed. The Tang wasn't just a cultural utopia. It was a high-stakes game of chess with real-world consequences. So, as we unravel the early years of the Tang dynasty under Lai Shimin, it's clear that this was an era of both grandeur and grit. The dynasty was like a beautifully crafted sword, elegant and deadly, with a history forged in the fires of ambition and tempered by the realities of governance. As Shimin's reign continued to unfold, the Tang dynasty was on the cusp of becoming a legend, not just in its own time, but for centuries to come. And trust me, the story is far from over. There's more intrigue, innovation, and imperial expansion on the horizon, so stay tuned as we continue to explore how the Tang dynasty shaped the course of Chinese history. As the Tang dynasty continued to strut its stuff under Emperor Taizong's shrewd leadership, China was on the verge of a cultural and economic renaissance that would make the Medici family blush. This era wasn't just about expanding borders and consolidating power. It was about making China the place to be. Picture a time when the Middle Kingdom wasn't just a geographical term, but a cultural epicenter that drew the world's gaze. If you were alive back then, you'd probably be scribbling Tang poetry in your journal while sipping on imported wine from the Silk Road. Speaking of scribbling, let's talk about the rock stars of the Tang dynasty, poets like Lai Bai and Du Fu. Forget touring with electric guitars. These guys wielded brushes and ink. Lai Bai, known as the immortal poet, was the kind of guy who'd be the life of the party, penning verse after a couple of drinks, his poetic muse often found at the bottom of a wine cup. Imagine a man who combined the swagger of a rock legend with the intellect of a philosopher. And then there's Du Fu, the poet saint, who was more like the introspective lyricist, chronicling the era's hardships and societal struggles as if channeling a medieval Bob Dylan. Lai Bai and Du Fu didn't just write about the moon or the fleeting joys of nature. They captured the soul of a dynasty brimming with contradictions. Stroll through any Tang dynasty street, and you'd find the rich tapestry of life they immortalized in verse. Bustling markets, imperial grandeur, and yes, the occasional rebellion or famine. These poets weren't just entertainers. They were the chroniclers of their time, offering an unvarnished glimpse into the empire's heart and soul. And what a time it was. Now, while poets were crafting their legacy in ink, merchants were busy turning the Silk Road into a superhighway of trade. This wasn't your average trade route. It was an economic juggernaut that spanned over 4,000 miles, linking China to the Mediterranean. If Marco Polo had a travel blog, the Silk Road would be the headline act. It was the Amazon prime of the ancient world, But instead of 2-day shipping, you got your goods after a few months of camel caravanning. The road wasn't just about silk either. It was a caravan of cultural exchange, carrying everything from spices and precious metals to religions and philosophies. Imagine China's economy back then if medieval accountants had Excel spreadsheets. With trade bustling like a New York Stock Exchange on steroids, China's GDP might have resembled the kind of figures that would make modern economists gawk. The Silk Road wasn't just about economic growth. It was about positioning China as the financial powerhouse of the ancient world. And don't get me started on the bureaucrats who counted the taxes. Those guys were the unsung heroes making sure the empire's coffers stayed full enough to fund both palaces and public projects. Yet let's not sugarcoat it. The Silk Road, while a boon for trade, wasn't all smooth sailing. Bandits, harsh climates, and political instability made it as treacherous as navigating a Black Friday sale. Traders risked life and limb to make their fortune, transforming them into the Indiana Joneses of their time. But for those who succeeded, the rewards were as rich as the silks they traded. Underneath this golden veneer, though, lay a more complicated picture. The Tang Dynasty wasn't just a fairy tale of prosperity. It was a balancing act of power and politics, where emperors walked the tightrope between innovation and tradition. The dynasty's mighty expansion and cultural achievements were matched by the need to keep a diverse population content. The empire was a melting pot of ethnicities and beliefs, and keeping everyone happy was like juggling flaming swords, a spectacle to behold but fraught with danger. Behind the poetry and trade, there were the realities of governance. The Tang's civil service examination system, for instance, was a pioneering effort to recruit the best minds for government. It was the SAT of its day, but with stakes far higher than a college acceptance letter. Pass, and you could climb the bureaucratic ladder. Fail, and you might find yourself as an underappreciated scribe, or worse, a peasant. The Tang era wasn't all art and commerce. It was also a time of scientific breakthrough. The dynasty's scholars weren't just sitting around reading scrolls. They were busy inventing things like woodblock printing, which would change how information spread. Imagine a world where a single page of text could be mass-produced, paving the way for ideas to travel faster than a Silk Road caravan. While Gutenberg gets all the credit for the printing press, the Tang Dynasty was laying the groundwork centuries earlier. And let's not forget gunpowder's humble beginnings, a concoction that would later redefine warfare and fireworks displays alike. In short, the Tang Dynasty was a period where art and innovation danced a delicate waltz, each enriching the other in a grand ballroom of history. It was a time when the empire's influence stretched its arms across continents, welcoming new ideas while preserving its own rich heritage. But this was just the beginning of the Golden Age. There's more to uncover as we delve deeper into how this dynasty shaped not only China, but the world. So, hold on to your silk scarves and poetry scrolls, because the saga of the Tang Dynasty is far from over. Stay tuned as we continue to journey through this remarkable period, exploring the legacy of a dynasty that was as complex as it was captivating. As the Tang Dynasty basked in the limelight of its golden age, a storm was brewing on the horizon that not even the most prophetic poets could have foreseen. Enter the Lushan Rebellion of 755 AD, a seismic event that rocked the very foundations of the empire, like a medieval hostile corporate takeover that would make Wall Street titans shiver. And Lushan, a Tang general with the charm of a reality TV villain and the ambition of a Silicon Valley disruptor, decided that being a military governor wasn't quite enough. No, he wanted the whole empire. Thank you very much. And Lushan wasn't just any general. He was a frontier firebrand, commanding a hefty army in the northeast regions of the empire. Think of him as the empire's regional manager, who suddenly decided he wanted to be CEO. In 755 AD, he declared himself emperor of a new dynasty, the Great Yan, and marched his troops towards the capital, Chang'an. Imagine an army of over 150,000 troops, all marching with the enthusiasm of a Black Friday crowd, but with swords and siege equipment instead of sharping carts. The rebellion wasn't just a military fiasco. It was an economic catastrophe that would send modern accountants reaching for the nearest bottle of aspirin. The Tang coffers, once brimming with the riches of the Silk Road, were suddenly hemorrhaging money faster than you can say, stark market crash. The costs of quelling the rebellion were astronomical, not to mention the economic disruption it caused. Inflation spiraled out of control as the government printed money faster than a kid with a new monopoly set. To make matters worse, the rebellion devastated some of the empire's most prosperous regions, reducing tax revenues to a trickle. And Lushan's insurrection wasn't just a military and economic crisis, it was a PR disaster. The Tang court, once the epitome of cultured elegance, suddenly looked like a dysfunctional boardroom in the midst of a hostile takeover. Emperor Xuanzang, who had overseen the empire's zenith, found himself fleeing the capital in disgrace. It's hard to maintain your image as the enlightened ruler of a flourishing empire when your palace is under siege, and your advisors are jumping ship like rats from a sinking vessel. But here's where things get interesting. Once the dust settled, and the empire began to reclaim lost territories, a political restructuring was in order. The Tang government had to act fast to plug the gaping holes in its administration and military. It was a bit like trying to rebuild a sandcastle after high tide, but with more bureaucracy and less sunscreen. The empire's once proud aristocracy saw its influence wane as new military governors, known as jidashi, rose to prominence. These regional commanders held power akin to medieval warlords, wielding military and civil authority in their domains. Imagine a Game of Thrones scenario where the lords hold all the cards and the king is merely a figurehead. The jidashi system was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it allowed the Tang to maintain some semblance of control over its vast territories. On the other hand, it sowed the seeds for future fragmentation, as these regional commanders often acted more like independent rulers than loyal servants of the emperor. The irony was palpable. The very structure designed to stabilize the empire also contained the blueprints for its eventual disintegration. Despite the chaos, the Tang leadership wasn't entirely out of tricks. They embarked on a series of reforms aimed at reviving the economy and centralizing power. It was a bit like trying to fix a leaky ship with duct tape and a prayer, but it was better than nothing. The government attempted to rein in inflation by introducing new, standardized coinage and curbing excessive minting, though the results were mixed at best. It was like trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube after a toddler's gotten hold of it. Not impossible, but certainly a challenge. In the wake of the rebellion, the Tang court also became a hotbed of intrigue and political maneuvering. New factions emerged, each vying for influence and control. It was like a medieval version of Survivor, where alliances shifted faster than the tides, and the stakes were nothing short of imperial dominance. The eunuchs, previously mere attendants, gained unprecedented power as kingmakers and advisors, using their position to manipulate the imperial court like seasoned puppeteers. The Lushan rebellion was a turning point for the Tang Dynasty, a stark reminder that no empire, no matter how glorious, is immune to the ravages of ambition and internal discord. It shattered the illusion of invincibility that had defined the Tang's early years, exposing the vulnerabilities of a sprawling bureaucracy and a fractious military. It was a lesson in the perils of overreach, a tale as old as history itself. Yet, even in the midst of turmoil, the Tang's cultural brilliance flickered on. The resilience of its poets, artists, and thinkers served as a testament to the enduring spirit of a civilization that refused to yield to chaos. The poetry of the era, now tinged with a summer hue, continued to capture the complexities of human experience, blending the beauty of nature with the harsh realities of war and loss. It was a testament to the power of art to transcend even the darkest of times, offering solace and insight in equal measure. So, as we navigate the stormy seas of the Tang Dynasty's mid-period challenges, we're reminded that history is not a linear journey, but a tapestry woven from triumphs and tribulations. The Tang Dynasty, once the beacon of cultural and economic prowess, now faced the daunting task of rebuilding and redefining its legacy. The journey was far from over, and the lessons of the past would continue to shape the destiny of an empire on the brink of transformation. Stay tuned, for the saga of the Tang Dynasty is a story that refuses to be neatly contained within the pages of history. While the Tang Dynasty was busy weathering the political storm post-Lushan rebellion, the empire's stability was slipping faster than an ice cube on a hot sidewalk. The rebels may have been quelled, but the aftershocks continued to rattle the imperial foundations. The rise of the Ji-dashi, those ambitious regional commanders who were more like freelance warlords than loyal public servants, turned out to be a ticking time bomb. Think of them as medieval CEOs who decided they preferred running their own startups rather than answering to a distant corporate office. And surprise, surprise, these mini-empires within an empire weren't exactly the recipe for centralized power. As these Ji-dashi gained more autonomy, the Tang emperors found themselves in a precarious game of whack-a-mole, trying to keep all the regional governors in check while holding on to the last shreds of imperial authority. It was like trying to herd cats, except these cats had armies and a penchant for betrayal. By the late 9th century, the Tang court was more of a theater of the absurd than a bastion of governance, with eunuchs, warlords, and bureaucrats all vying for whatever power they could grab. The court itself was a corrupt circus, where bribes were as common as bad haircuts in the 80s. One particularly charming example of this chaos was the Huang Kao rebellion, which kicked off in 874 AD. Huang Kao was a failed scholar who decided that if he couldn't pass the imperial exams, he might as well try his hand at rebellion. And oh boy, did he succeed, at least initially. With a ragtag army of disgruntled peasants and bandits, Huang Kao swept across the empire, capturing cities like a medieval tour de force. When he took the capital, Chang'an, in 800 AD, it was less a triumphant entry and more a catastrophic looting spree. The once glorious city was left looking like it had hosted a particularly rowdy college party, minus the red solo cups. By the time Huang Kao was finally defeated in 884 AD, the Tang dynasty was about as stable as a three-legged chair. The treasury was empty, the countryside was ravaged, and the imperial authority was a distant memory. The warlords, now more entrenched than ever, carved up the empire like a Thanksgiving turkey, each taking a slice for themselves. The idea of a unified dynasty was little more than a wistful dream. The final nail in the Tang coffin came in 907 AD, when Zhou, a former salt smuggler turned warlord, because why not, decided that the emperor was surplus to requirements. Zhou, ever the opportunist, declared himself emperor of the new later Liang dynasty, effectively ending over 2.5 centuries of Tang rule. Talk about a hostile takeover. The Tang era came to a close not with a grand battle or a dramatic fall, but with a whimper, a slow, painful dissolution into the chaos of the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period. But before we close the book on the Tang, let's take a moment to reflect on the legacy of this once great dynasty. Despite its less than glorious exit, the Tang dynasty remains a cultural titan. Its achievements in art, literature, and technology left a mark more enduring than the political squabbles that eventually brought it down. The poetry of Lai Bai and Du Fu still resonates today, capturing the spirit of a China that was both majestic and deeply human. The technological innovations, from woodblock printing to the compass, were like seeds planted in fertile ground, sprouting into the global advancements we take for granted. The Tang also offers a cautionary tale of governance. The dynasty's fall is a stark reminder of what happens when central authority is undermined by internal strife and corruption. The allure of power can blind even the wisest of leaders, leading to decisions that unravel the fabric of a nation. The Tang emperors, despite their cultural achievements, failed to adapt to the changing political landscape, allowing warlords to flourish and ultimately fracture the empire. Yet, in its heyday, the Tang dynasty was a beacon of what could be achieved when ambition was tempered with vision. It was a period when China wasn't just a place on a map, but a cultural and economic superpower. The Silk Road was more than a trade route. It was a bridge between worlds, facilitating not just the exchange of goods, but of ideas, religions, and philosophies. The Tang's cosmopolitan capital, Chang'an, was a melting pot of cultures, a testament to the empire's openness and influence. The Tang dynasty's legacy extends beyond China's borders. Its cultural and technological contributions influenced neighboring civilizations, leaving an indelible mark on Korea, Japan, and beyond. The civil service examination system, although flawed, laid the groundwork for meritocracy in governance, a concept that echoes in modern institutions. In the grand tapestry of history, the Tang dynasty stands out as a vibrant thread, woven with both triumph and tragedy. Its rise and fall offer lessons on the impermanence of power and the enduring nature of culture. As we close this chapter, we remember the Tang not just as a dynasty, but as a symbol of human potential and the complexities of governance. It was an era where emperors were both revered and reviled, where poets captured the essence of life, and where the echoes of its legacy continue to resonate through the corridors of time. And so, dear listener, as you tuck yourself in with these tales of glory and folly, remember that history is a mirror reflecting both the beauty and the folly of the human condition. It's Ad 70, and Rome is a sizzling cauldron of chaos. Imagine a city where power struggles are as common as toga parties and politics is the ultimate blood sport. At the center of this maelstrom stands Emperor Vespasian, a man with a plan so cunning Machiavelli would nod in approval from the future. You see, Vespasian wasn't just any emperor. He was the kind of ruler who knew how to play the long game. His audience wasn't just the Senate or the elite, but the everyday Roman citizen who, let's face it, was tired of Nero's excessive antics. Vespasian needed a grand gesture to solidify his power and win the people's favor, and what better way to do that than with a colossal amphitheater right in the heart of Rome? Enter the Colosseum, or as it was known back then, the Flavian Amphitheater. This wasn't some whimsy of an idea. No, this was a political masterstroke. The construction of the Colosseum was Vespasian's version of bread and circuses, an all-you-can-watch spectacle of gladiator games and public events meant to distract from the mundane grievances of daily life, like high taxes and the occasional barbarian invasion. If there's one thing Romans loved, it was a good fight, and Vespasian was going to give them the ultimate arena for it. But let's not skip over the economic savvy at play here. The construction of this monumental structure wasn't just about keeping the masses entertained. It was also about cold, hard cash. Well, more like cold, hard spoils from the Jewish war. Yep, the funds to build this architectural marvel were largely acquired from the loot of Rome's victory in Judea, including the infamous siege of Jerusalem in AD 70. The sacking of the temple in Jerusalem not only filled Roman coffers with gold and silver, but also provided a hefty workforce of enslaved prisoners. Talk about turning tragedy into triumph, Roman style. Now, before you get too swept up in the romanticism of this grand vision, remember that the Colosseum's construction was also a testament to Rome's relentless ambition, and frankly, its ruthless efficiency. We're talking about a project that took roughly 8 years to complete, starting in AD 72 and wrapping up in AD 80 under the reign of Vespasian's son, Titus. This wasn't just about building an arena, it was about showcasing Roman engineering prowess. The Colosseum could hold an estimated 50,000 to 80,000 spectators, a logistical feat that would make any modern stadium architect break out in a sweat. Architecturally, the Romans weren't exactly reinventing the wheel here. They borrowed heavily from their neighbors and predecessors. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of peeking over the fence to see what the Greeks were doing with their theaters and temples. Romans took the Greek penchant for aesthetics and added a flair for the dramatic. And by dramatic, I mean let's make it bigger and throw in some gladiators. It's like they saw the Greek amphitheaters and said, nice porch, but ours will have lions. The Colosseum's design was an amalgamation of the best bits of Roman and Greek architecture, but with a twist that was distinctly Roman. The structure featured arches and columns that mimicked Greek styles, yet the use of concrete allowed them to build on a scale that was previously unimaginable. Concrete, by the way, was Rome's secret weapon, strong, durable, and relatively cheap. It was the ancient version of innovation meeting practicality. If the Greeks were the original thinkers, the Romans were the ultimate doers. As this enormous project unfolded, it wasn't just the architectural plans that were ambitious. Vespasian had a vision that was all-encompassing. He knew the Colosseum would stand as a symbol of Rome's might and cultural supremacy. It was a declaration that not only was Rome the center of the known world, but it also had the entertainment to match. And it wasn't just about the games. It was about the spectacle, the kind that left an indelible mark on anyone who witnessed it. From naval battles staged in the flooded arena to the gory glory of gladiatorial combat, the Colosseum offered more drama than a year's worth of Roman Senate meetings. Of course, the Colosseum wasn't built in a vacuum. It rose from the ashes of Nero's extravagant Domus Aurea, or Golden House, a sprawling palace complex that had become a symbol of imperial excess and disconnect from the Roman populace. By repurposing this land for a public venue, Vespasian was sending a clear message. Rome's glory was for the people, not just the privileged few. It was a clever PR move, transforming a site of resentment into a cornerstone of communal pride. Yet, despite all this pomp and circumstance, the Colosseum story isn't just one of triumph and grandeur. It's also a tale of human cost and labor. Thousands of slaves toiled under the scorching sun, their sweat and blood literally cementing the legacy of the Flavian dynasty. The construction site was a hive of activity, with skilled artisans and unskilled laborers working side by side, driven by the relentless Roman ambition to achieve the impossible. In this chaotic blend of politics, economics, and architecture, the Colosseum emerged not only as a monumental feat of engineering, but also as a reflection of Rome's complex society. It was a place where the social hierarchy was both reinforced and temporarily suspended. Senators and plebeians alike could rub shoulders in the stands, united in their thirst for spectacle. For a few hours, at least, the Colosseum offered an escape from the rigid structures of Roman life. As the first stones were laid, Vespasian's vision began to take shape, a vision that would outlast his own reign and continue to captivate imaginations for millennia. It was a bold statement to the world that Rome was not just a city of marble and stone, but a living, breathing metropolis that celebrated its power through entertainment and architecture. The Colosseum, born from war spoils and political acumen, would become an enduring icon of Roman ingenuity and the eternal allure of spectacle. And as the sun set over the bustling city, casting long shadows across the nascent structure, it was clear that the Flavian amphitheater was destined to be more than just a building. It was to be the beating heart of an empire. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the nascent structure, the Colosseum was already whispering tales of Roman ambition and relentless labor. The construction site was a bustling symphony of human effort, where the clatter of hammers and chisels formed the background music to an epic drama of engineering and endurance. Forget the romantic vision of toga-clad architects waving their hands and magically creating architectural wonders. The reality was far more grounded, literally, in the sweat and toil of thousands of workers. Let's get one thing straight. The construction of the Colosseum wasn't some Roman miracle. It was a testament to the empire's ability to marshal resources and manpower like no other. To build this monumental amphitheater, the Romans deployed a workforce that would make modern labor unions break out in hives. Estimates suggest up to 100,000 enslaved people were involved, many of whom were captured during the Jewish War. Their lives were spent hauling massive travertine stones, each weighing as much as an SUV, from the nearby quarries in Tivoli, some 20 miles away. That's like schlepping a car from the suburbs to downtown Rome without the luxury of roads or personal space. Talk about a commute from hell. The logistics were a marvel of their own. Picture a conveyor belt of human and animal power, with oxen dragging sledges loaded with stone, while workers and slaves pushed and pulled in unison. The Romans, being the efficiency aficionados they were, made good use of everything, including the very earth the Colosseum would stand on. The site was part of Nero's drained artificial lake, so engineers had to dig deep and lay a solid foundation. None of this was left to chance. Roman engineers were the original control freaks, calculating angles and stresses with precision that would make a modern civil engineer nod in approval. But let's talk about the real star of this show, Roman concrete, or as the Romans called it, *opus cementitium*. This wasn't your average run-of-the-mill mix. The secret sauce was volcanic ash from Parzuali, which gave the concrete its durability and strength, allowing the Romans to build structures that have withstood the test of time better than my first smartphone. This magic mixture was poured into wooden molds to form the arches and vaults that became the backbone of the Colosseum's design. No wonder the Romans were able to make their structures soar. When you've got concrete this good, it's like upgrading from a tricycle to a Ferrari. The Colosseum's outer walls were clad in gleaming travertine, a limestone that gave the structure its iconic, sunlit glow. About 100 13,000 cubic meters, or roughly 13,000 dump trucks worth of travertine were used. And if you're wondering how they managed this Herculean task without power tools, the answer is simple: a whole lot of elbow grease and some clever engineering. Roman cranes, powered by human treadmills, lifted stones into place, while scaffolding crisscrossed the structure like a giant spider web. The laborers were the unsung heroes, their stories often lost in the grand narrative of Roman greatness. Now, you might be tempted to think of this as some ancient version of a reality TV show where Roman engineers and architects competed for the emperor's favor. Sadly, there were no dramatic eliminations or surprise plot twists, just a relentless drive to complete the project on time. The stakes were high, and the pressure was palpable. Vespasian had set the bar, and his son Titus was determined to see his father's vision through to completion, lest history remember him as the emperor who couldn't finish what Dad started. As the Colosseum rose from the ground, it symbolized not just the power of the Flavian dynasty, but also the sheer willpower and ingenuity of Roman society. The amphitheater was more than just a structure. It was a complex machine designed to awe and entertain. Its design featured 80 entrances, allowing tens of thousands of spectators to move in and out with the efficiency of a modern-day sports arena. The seating was arranged with military precision, ensuring that Rome's rigid social hierarchy was maintained. Senators at the bottom, plebeians at the top, and women, well, they could enjoy the view from the nosebleeds. But here's where the myth-busting comes in. Many people envision the Colosseum's construction as a seamless feat of innovation and foresight. The truth is, while Roman engineering was indeed impressive, it was also a process of trial and error. Mistakes were made, solutions were improvised, and the construction site was a testament to the adaptability and resilience of Roman engineers. They were less like divine architects and more like master problem solvers, working with what they had and thinking on their feet. It was a gritty, real-world endeavor that didn't shy away from the sweat-streaked reality of its execution. By the time the Colosseum was completed in AD 80, it stood as a tribute to the empire's might and the countless hands that built it. It was a place where the boundaries of reality and spectacle blurred, offering a stage for both human and animal performers. Yet, behind the grandeur lay the stories of the workers who toiled day in and day out, driven by forces beyond their control. The Colosseum was a marvel not because of some mystical Roman magic, but because of the sheer grit and determination of those who labored to bring it to life. As the amphitheater loomed over the city, casting its shadow over the Roman Forum, it was clear that the Colosseum was more than just an architectural achievement. It was a testament to Rome's ability to bend the world to its will, a symbol of the empire's dominance, and a reminder that behind every great monument lies the untold story of human effort and ambition. And with that, the stage was set for the Colosseum to become the beating heart of Rome, a testament to the empire's might, a symbol of its cultural supremacy, and a lasting monument to the endurance of its people. As the sun set on yet another day of construction, Rome was ready to unveil its greatest show on earth. But that, my friends, is a story for another time. And so, the Colosseum stood ready, a grandiose stage for the theater of life and death that was about to unfold. The Romans, ever the aficionados of drama, had concocted a spectacle so potent that it blurred the lines between entertainment and execution. Now, let's pivot to the heart of this arena, the gladiatorial games. Forget the sanitized sports we know today. This was less about athletic prowess and more about orchestrated chaos, with a side of political maneuvering. The allure of the gladiatorial games lay in their ability to captivate a populace hungry for distraction from the everyday grind of Roman life, which often involved dealing with things like questionable sanitation and an empire-sized bureaucracy. These weren't just any games. They were a masterclass in crowd control and social commentary. The games served a dual purpose: to entertain and to remind the Roman populace of the might and mercy of their rulers. It was bread and circuses, with a more literal interpretation of the circus's part. The Roman obsession with blood sport was a reflection of their societal values. Strength, valor, and skill in combat were virtues to be celebrated, and what better way to display these than in a grand amphitheater? The gladiators were the rock stars of their day, a curious mix of condemned criminals, prisoners of war and volunteers seeking fame and fortune. Yes, you heard that right. Some people willingly signed up for this life, drawn by the allure of celebrity and the chance to earn their freedom. Imagine if your favorite sports star risked life and limb for every game. Talk about high stakes. Now, let's bust a myth that Hollywood seems to love: the infamous thumbs up or thumbs down gesture. Contrary to popular belief, the whole thumbs down means death scenario is more cinematic flair than historical fact. The real gestures are a bit murkier. Ancient texts suggest that palis verso, literally, with a turned thumb, had different interpretations, and it wasn't always clear-cut. The thumb could be used in various ways to signal a vote from the crowd or even the emperor, but the exact meaning is lost in translation. So next time you see a gladiator film, take the dramatic thumbs down with a grain of Roman salt. The games themselves were meticulously planned, ranging from one-on-one duels to grand reenactments of famous battles. Picture an ancient version of a blockbuster action movie, complete with a live audience and no CGI. They even flooded the arena to stage mock naval battles, because why not raise the stakes with a little water? It was all about spectacle, and the Romans were masters of the art. But beneath the surface of this grand entertainment lay the gritty reality of control and propaganda. The games were a tool for the emperors to flex their political muscles and demonstrate their benevolence or ruthlessness, depending on the mood of the day. By sponsoring these events, emperors could curry favor with the masses and distract them from any political unrest or economic woes. It was a calculated move, a way to keep the pulse of the empire's heart steady and its citizens pacified. And the crowd, they were as much a part of the spectacle as the gladiators themselves. The Colosseum's tiered seating was a microcosm of Roman society, with the social hierarchy literally built into the stands. Senators and nobles sat closest to the action, a stark reminder of their elevated status, while the commoners filled the upper levels. Even the seating arrangement was a lesson in Roman order and organization. As for the gladiators, they were both revered and reviled, a paradox of celebrity and expendability. Known as *origi*, or *beshiri*, depending on their specialty, these fighters were trained in schools known as *ludi*, where they honed their skills under the watchful eyes of trainers. They were investments, after all, and no owner wanted to see their prized fighter cut down too soon. The life of a gladiator was brutal and short, but for those who survived, there was the promise of freedom and fortune. A handful even became legends in their own time, their names echoing through the annals of history like victorious athletes. So, while the glamour of the games had its allure, the reality was far more complex. It was a world of intense human drama, where life and death played out under the watchful eyes of the Roman populace and their rulers. The games were a reflection of the empire itself, grand, violent, and utterly captivating. They spoke to the Roman spirit, a spirit that reveled in the spectacle, embraced the chaos, and in doing so revealed the very essence of its civilization. As the Colosseum echoed with the roars of the crowd, it became clear that this wasn't just about the games. It was about power, politics, and the unyielding human desire to be entertained and amazed. And in that arena, where the sands ran red with the blood of fighters, the true spectacle was not in the combat itself, but in the reflection of the society that demanded it. Like all great theaters, the Colosseum offered a mirror to its audience, showing them not just what they wanted to see, but who they truly were. And with each game, each battle, the Colosseum cemented its place not just as a physical structure, but as a symbol of the complexities and contradictions of the Roman Empire itself. It was a place where the boundaries between legend and reality blurred, where myths were born and truths were told, and where the pulse of the empire beat to the rhythm of the games. As the dust settled and the arena emptied, the Colosseum stood as a testament to the enduring allure of spectacle and the indomitable spirit of Rome. But remember, even in the heart of such grandeur and glory, there's always more to the story than meets the eye. As the Colosseum settled into its role as Rome's premier venue for blood-soaked entertainment, the attention inevitably turned to a topic that interests audiences across millennia: money. You know, that universal language that speaks louder than any sword clash or lion roar. Maintaining an architectural marvel like the Colosseum wasn't cheap, and it certainly wasn't left to chance. Think of it as the ancient precursor to modern stadium economics, except instead of overpriced hot dogs, they had gladiators to feed and lions to tame. The Colosseum, or the Flavian Amphitheater, was more than just a pretty face in the Roman architectural lineup. It was a financial beast that needed constant feeding. To keep the games running and the crowds roaring, Rome poured money into its upkeep like a modern sports team invests in a star quarterback. And let's not forget, this amphitheater wasn't just about the games. It was a well-oiled machine of public relations. Every spectacle was designed to reinforce the emperor's power and benevolence, a PR strategy that would make any modern politician green with envy. Now, how did they keep this colossal structure from crumbling under its own weight, and the weight of thousands of spectators? Enter the Roman treasury, bolstered by taxes and the ever-reliable spoils of war. Taxes were the bread and butter of Roman finance, collected with the enthusiasm of a kid at a candy store. Whether you were a Roman citizen or an unfortunate soul in a newly conquered territory, you contribute your fair share to the empire's coffers. But taxes alone weren't enough to keep the Colosseum's coffers filled. Rome had to get creative. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of the numbers. To give you an idea, the annual cost of maintaining the Colosseum was estimated to be in the tens of millions of sestertii. We're talking about a sum that would make any ancient accountant break into a cold sweat. These funds covered everything from building repairs to the salaries of the staff who kept the place running like a well-tuned chariot. There were animal handlers, trainers, and a whole host of other roles that ensured each event went off without a hitch. And where did this money come from? Partly from the spoils of war. Rome, being the conqueror of the known world, was never short on conflict. Victories meant loot, and loot meant money in the bank. The spoils from the Jewish war, for example, were instrumental in funding the Colosseum's construction. Once the amphitheater was up and running, subsequent campaigns helped bankroll its ongoing operations. It was a case of turning swords into plowshares, or in this case, into tickets for the next big game. But it wasn't just about the upkeep. The Colosseum was also a cash cow in its own right. The games drew enormous crowds, and with them came economic activity on a scale that would make any modern event planner drool. Vendors hawked their goods, innkeepers saw their rooms filled, and the streets buzzed with commerce. The ripple effect on the Roman economy was substantial, as the Colosseum acted like a giant magnet, pulling in people, and their money, from all corners of the empire. The economic impact of the Colosseum extended beyond just the immediate area. It had a role to play in the broader Roman economy, too. By hosting these spectacular events, Rome not only entertained its citizens, but also kept them employed. It was a clever way to maintain social order, a sort of ancient job creation scheme that also happened to involve a lot of blood and sand. The games provided work for countless Romans, from the artisans who crafted the gladiators' weapons to the laborers who cleaned up after the shows. And while we're on the topic of myth-busting, let's dispel the notion that the Colosseum was merely a frivolous extravagance. Sure, it was a monument to Rome's love of spectacle, but it was also a shrewd investment. The emperors understood the power of public entertainment as a tool of social control. Keep the masses entertained, and they are less likely to revolt. It was a strategy that borrowed from the playbook of every successful ruler. Give the people what they want, and they'll forget to ask for what they need. The Colosseum's role wasn't just financial, it was deeply political. Hosting games was a way for emperors to curry favor with the populace. It was like throwing a lavish party where everyone was invited, and the emperor was the benevolent host. Each event was an opportunity to showcase imperial generosity, reinforcing the idea that the emperor cared for his people. It was a masterclass in optics, a way to keep the public's gaze fixed on the arena and away from any political turmoil brewing outside its walls. In the grand scheme of things, the Colosseum was a symbol of Rome's unparalleled might and ingenuity. It was a testament to the empire's ability to marshal resources on an epic scale, a showcase of Roman engineering and economic prowess. Yet, behind the grandeur, there was a practical side, a cold, calculated understanding of how to keep an empire running smoothly. Modern parallels are hard to ignore. Today, stadiums serve a similar purpose, acting as economic engines for cities and regions. They generate revenue through ticket sales, advertising, and concessions, much like the Colosseum did in its heyday. And just like the Roman emperors, Modern leaders understand the value of keeping the public entertained and engaged. Whether it's a football game or a rock concert, the principle remains the same. Keep the people happy, and they'll keep coming back for more. So, as you walk through the ruins of the Colosseum, remember that it's more than just a relic of a bygone era. It's a reminder of the timeless dance between power, money, and entertainment, a dance that continues to play out in stadiums and arenas around the world. In the end, the Colosseum wasn't just about the games. It was about the empire itself, a reflection of its values, its ambitions, and its enduring legacy. And with that, the Colosseum continues to stand as a testament to Rome's unyielding spirit, a symbol of its greatness, and a reminder of the complex interplay of economics, politics, and human nature that underpinned one of history's greatest empires. As the sun sets over the ancient structure, it casts long shadows that stretch across time, whispering tales of glory and ambition to those who care to listen. And as we look forward to the next chapter in this storied saga, one thing is clear. The Colosseum, in all its grandeur, still has stories to tell. So, as we peer into the annals of history, the Colosseum stands not just as a marvel of ancient engineering, but as a witness to time's relentless march. It might surprise you to learn that by the time the Western Roman Empire was doing its best impression of a sinking ship in the 5th century, the Colosseum had already started its gradual descent into decline. The once roaring amphitheater became a silent testament to the shifting tides of history. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Rome wasn't built in a day, and its fall wasn't overnight either. As the empire faltered, so did the Colosseum's status as the hotspot for Rome's bloody entertainment. By the 6th century, the gladiatorial games had been banned, thanks to a combination of changing tastes and Christian disapproval. The early church fathers weren't exactly fans of the whole blood and glory motif, preferring instead to focus on redemption and salvation. Without its main attraction, the Colosseum's grandstands were left to the mercies of nature. And nature, my friends, is no gentle custodian. Let's talk about repurposing, medieval style. With the empire in economic tatters and the administrative structure crumbling faster than a Roman fresco, the Colosseum found itself in the hands of opportunists. By the 12th century, the Frangipani family, a name that sounds like they should be running a vineyard rather than a medieval gang, decided the Colosseum would make a splendid fortress, because who wouldn't want to live in a place with built-in seating for 50,000 guests? This period saw the amphitheater transformed from a symbol of imperial might into a castle of sorts, complete with fortifications. Of course, this wasn't a glamorous renovation project. The Colosseum wasn't getting an HGTV makeover. It was more of an as-is sale. Parts of the structure were cannibalized for building materials, a fate not uncommon for ancient monuments. Marble and stone were carted off to construct new churches and palaces throughout Rome, leaving the Colosseum with more gaps in its facade than a Roman senator's alibi. By the 15th century, it was effectively a quarry in the middle of Rome, an all-you-can-carry buffet for builders. And yet, amid all this repurposing, the Colosseum's legend was far from buried. If anything, its aura only grew. The Renaissance, with its obsession for all things classical, saw the Colosseum as a poignant reminder of Rome's former glory. Artists and thinkers flocked to its ruins, inspired by the grandeur of a bygone era. It's as if the Colosseum had metamorphosed into a muse for creativity, whispering tales of Rome's past splendor to those who paused to listen. Fast forward to the 18th century, and the Colosseum had acquired a new symbolic significance. It became a site of pilgrimage, not just for the devout, but also for the romantically inclined. Poets and writers like Lord Byron and Charles Dickens wandered its crumbling corridors, their imaginations alight with visions of ancient Rome's drama. The Romantics were particularly captivated, viewing the Colosseum as a testament to the sublime beauty of decay, a notion that, while charming, overlooks the gritty reality of its decline. The Colosseum had become the ultimate paradox, a ruin that stood strong. Now, let's address some myths that have clung to the Colosseum like ivy on its ancient walls. One enduring tale is that the arena was a site of mass Christian martyrdom. While it's true that Christians were persecuted in Rome, the historical evidence for large-scale massacres in the Colosseum itself is sketchier than a Roman senator's tax returns. It's a story that's been embellished over centuries, fueled by a potent mix of religious zeal and dramatic flair. But let's not dismiss the allure of these myths entirely. They have their own charm, offering a romanticized vision of history that speaks to our imagination. The idea of Christians bravely facing lions in the arena captures the drama and tragedy we love in our stories. It's a narrative that, while not entirely factual, resonates with the human spirit's capacity for resilience and courage. As the 19th and 20th centuries rolled in, the Colosseum found itself at the center of a new wave of appreciation and preservation. Archaeological efforts aimed to stabilize the structure, ensuring it wouldn't crumble into oblivion. The fascist regime of Mussolini even appropriated the Colosseum as a symbol of Italy's imperial past, using it as a backdrop for propaganda. Talk about a structure with range. It's gone from a venue for gladiators to a political stage across millennia. Today, the Colosseum stands as one of the world's most iconic landmarks, drawing millions of tourists each year who come to bask in its shadow and snap selfies in its hallowed halls. And yet, it remains more than just a tourist attraction. It's a testament to human ambition and ingenuity, a reminder of an empire's grandeur and its inevitable decline. It's a monument that whispers tales of triumph and tragedy, of glory and decay. In the end, the Colosseum's story is one of resilience. It's a structure that has withstood the test of time, not by remaining unchanged, but by transforming with the eras. Each layer of its history adds to its mystique, creating a tapestry that reflects the complexities of human civilization. The Colosseum is a reminder that history is not just the story of kings and empires, but of people and their enduring dreams. So, next time you wander through its arches or gaze at it from afar, remember the myriad tales it holds within its walls. The Colosseum is more than a relic of the past. It's a living testament to the power of storytelling, a symbol of our collective heritage. It stands as a beacon of history, inviting us to reflect on the legacy we're building today and what will endure in the centuries to come. And as the sun sets over the eternal city, casting its golden glow on the Colosseum's ancient stones, we're reminded of the enduring allure of history. It's a tale as old as Rome itself, one of power, spectacle, and the unyielding spirit of humanity. The Colosseum, in its timeless grandeur, continues to captivate our imaginations, whispering stories of a complex past and inspiring the dreams of future generations. In the frosty grip of a Lincolnshire winter in 1642, a baby entered the world so prematurely that he was said to fit into a quart pot. This tiny marvel was none other than Isaac Newton. Despite arriving with all the fanfare of a whisper, Newton would grow up to shout across the ages with ideas that shook the very foundations of science. But before he became the patron saint of physics, he was just a scrappy kid in a chaotic world where the Renaissance's afterglow was still flickering amidst the shadows of medieval superstition. Newton's early life was anything but easy street. His father, also named Isaac, shuffled off this mortal coil before young Isaac even opened his eyes to it. His mother, Hannah Icecoff, remarried when Isaac was just 3, and not to a man particularly fond of stepsons. So off Isaac went to live with his grandmother. Perhaps it was this early game of familial musical chairs that instilled in him a certain solitary resilience. After all, who needs siblings when you have gravitational equations to keep you company? As Newton grew, so did his curiosity, though less about the world of numbers, and more about the mystical allure of alchemy. Yes, before he was the king of calculus, Newton was neck-deep in the quest for the philosopher's stone. He spent more time turning lead into gold, at least in theory, than he did solving algebraic equations. Who knew that the man responsible for scientific principles that govern motion spent his formative years chasing magical potions like a medieval Harry Potter? Spoiler alert, he never found that stone, but he managed to transmute the dross of myth into the gold of science. Now, let's talk about Newton's school days. You might think the man who would later unravel the mysteries of the universe was a child prodigy, dazzling peers and teachers alike with his brilliance. Not exactly. In reality, young Isaac was more often found embroiled in schoolyard scuffles than intellectual debates. He wasn't even top of his class until a particularly bruising encounter with a bully lit a fire under him. From then on, it was less about survival of the fittest and more about the survival of the smartest. Newton attended the King's School in Grantham, where he boarded with the family of an apothecary. This might explain his lifelong obsession with chemistry and alchemy. But even here, he was more of a tinkerer than a scholar. He built sundials, water clocks, and even a windmill powered by a mouse. Practical, yes, but not exactly the kind of thing that gets you into the history books, unless you're Isaac Newton. It wasn't until 1661, at the ripe age of 18, that Newton took his act to the big city, enrolling at Trinity College, Cambridge. This was a time when the scientific revolution was just revving its engines, and Newton was about to become one of its prime movers. Yet even at Cambridge, he remained an outlier. While others were content with Aristotle, Newton devoured Descartes and Galileo, those rebels with a cause who dared to question the status quo. It was here that Newton's genius began to bloom, fertilized by the fertile chaos of a world on the cusp of enlightenment. Newton's journey from the tiny, frail baby to the towering figure of science is a testament to his tenacity and sheer intellectual audacity. He didn't just stand on the shoulders of giants, as he so humbly claimed. He built a ladder of his own, rung by painstaking rung. In a world still clinging to the edges of mysticism, Newton dared to peek behind the curtain and reveal the machinery of the cosmos. But that's a story for another day, as we continue to unravel the life of the man who turned the universe from a riddle, wrapped in a mystery, inside an enigma, into a set of elegant equations. So, while Newton's early years may not have been the stuff of legend, they were undoubtedly the crucible in which his formidable intellect was forged. Whether dodging bullies or dabbling in alchemy, young Isaac was constantly pushing against the boundaries of his world, and in doing so, he set the stage for a career that would redefine what it meant to know and understand the universe. So, with a mind as restless as a caffeinated squirrel, Newton embarked on his Cambridge adventure in 1661. At this point, the scientific revolution was a bit like a rock concert, just getting started, audience buzzing, but the main act not quite on stage yet. And while his fellow students might have been content to party like it was 1599, Newton had his eyes on the future, even if it was a future where he'd rather play with prisms than people. Cambridge was a hotbed of intellectual activity, even if it wasn't exactly the kind of place that encouraged groundbreaking science. The curriculum was still heavily bathed in the stale glow of Aristotle's teachings, which, let's be honest, had all the cutting-edge insight of a Renaissance fair. But Newton wasn't the kind to be shackled by outdated philosophies. He was more interested in the renegades of the scientific world, the Galileos and Descartes, those wild thinkers who dared to suggest that maybe, just maybe, the Earth wasn't the center of the universe. Newton's time at Cambridge was less about the formal education and more about the DIY learning. He devoured books and constructed his own experiments, probably to the dismay of any roommate who valued their sleep. Among his favorite pastimes, optics. While his peers were busy figuring out how to survive on the typical student diet of gruel and grog, Newton was busy splitting light with a prism, laying the groundwork for what would eventually become his theory of color. Speaking of light, let's shine some on the infamous apple story. We've all heard the tale. Newton's sitting under a tree, minding his own business, when wham! An apple drops on his head, and voila, gravity is discovered. It's a charming anecdote, akin to the kind of story you tell a child to make bedtime more interesting. The truth, however, is less cinematic. It's more likely that Newton contemplated gravity while observing apples fall, not directly onto his noggin, but rather in the quiet moments of reflection. In reality, it was Newton's relentless pursuit of understanding that led him to gravity, not an impromptu fruit assault. Now, let's talk about the plague, because who doesn't love a good pandemic story? In 1665, the bubonic plague decided to take a European tour, and Cambridge, like many places, shut its doors tighter than a miser's wallet. Newton retreated to his family estate in Woolsthorpe, setting up what would become his own personal think tank. While others were busy avoiding rats and bad air, Newton was knee-deep in what would later be called his Annus Mirabilis, or Year of Wonders. And what a year it was! In this rural isolation, Newton's brain went into overdrive. In the span of about 18 months, he laid the foundations for calculus. You know, that math class that gives students nightmares to this day. That was Newton's doing. He didn't just stop there. He also made significant strides in optics and began pondering the forces that govern celestial bodies. It turns out that social distancing was just what Newton needed to unlock the mysteries of the universe. Calculus is often credited as one of Newton's crowning achievements, and rightly so. It provided a new language to describe change and motion, a mathematical toolkit that physicists, economists, and engineers can't live without. But of course, no good story is complete without a bit of drama. Enter Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, a German mathematician who independently developed calculus around the same time. This sparked one of history's most famous intellectual spats, with accusations of plagiarism flying across the channel like a game of mathematical dodgeball. But that's a tale for another day. Meanwhile, in the realm of optics, Newton was busy proving that white light was not a singular entity, but rather a composite of different colors. Through his experiments with prisms, he demonstrated that when white light passes through a prism, it splits into a spectrum of colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. This was not just a revelation, it was a revolution. It challenged the long-held belief that color was a mixture of light and darkness, an idea as outdated as a medieval map. Newton's work on gravity, however, was where he really started to rock the scientific boat. He began formulating his thoughts on how the same force that made an apple fall to the ground also kept the moon in orbit around the Earth. This was the seed that would eventually grow into his law of universal gravitation, a concept that would forever alter our understanding of the universe. But in 1665, these were still just the whisperings of a theory, waiting to take center stage. Despite his groundbreaking work, Newton was not one to seek immediate fame. In fact, he was notoriously secretive about his discoveries. He preferred the quiet company of his thoughts to the bustling chaos of academic debate. But this secrecy wasn't just a quirk, it was a strategy. Newton knew the power of his ideas and chose to release them only when he was ready, much like a rock band that waits for the perfect moment to drop a new album. It's fascinating to consider how this period of solitude, forced by a deadly plague, became one of the most productive times in Newton's life. In the grand tapestry of history, it's a reminder that sometimes isolation can be the catalyst for innovation. While the world outside was embroiled in chaos, Newton was busy constructing the very foundations of modern science. As we leave Newton on the brink of his next great leap, it's worth pondering the sheer audacity of his intellect. Here was a man who, faced with the threat of a pandemic, chose not to flee in fear, but to confront the mysteries of the cosmos. His time at Cambridge and the subsequent retreat to Woolsthorpe were not just chapters in his life, but turning points in the story of science itself. And while we've only scratched the surface of his achievements, it's clear that Newton's journey was far from over. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the life of the man who dared to think beyond the confines of his time. Newton's journey was far from over, but the plot was about to thicken faster than a Shakespearean tragedy. As we dive into his middle years, we find Newton juggling more roles than a Hollywood actor in a multi-franchise movie deal. Picture this: a mathematician, a physicist, a reluctant public servant, and a rival to Robert Hooke, all wrapped up in one complex human package. It's like trying to fit a grand piano inside a phone booth, but somehow Newton managed it. First up, let's address the Newton-Hooke rivalry, a spat so epic it makes modern celebrity feuds look like playground scuffles. Robert Hooke, a scientist with a penchant for controversy, was a man who had enough ego to fill the Royal Society's entire meeting room. Newton, on the other hand, preferred the solitude of his own genius. Their rivalry was less about scientific discourse and more like a competitive version of who can be the most brilliant. Hooke accused Newton of borrowing ideas without due credit, an accusation that Newton might have deflected with the grace of a Victorian-era fencer. The feud reached its peak with the publication of Newton's Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica in 1687, a work that would become the backbone of classical mechanics. Hooke claimed that Newton had filched the inverse square law of gravitation from him. Newton, being Newton, decided to cut Hooke's contributions from the narrative altogether, like an editor with a grudge. Let's just say, if Newton and Hooke were alive today, their Twitter beef would break the internet. Now, if you thought Newton's life was all about equations and disputes, think again. In 1696, he took on the role of warden of the Royal Mint, swapping abstract formulas for the cold, hard reality of currency. Why the career pivot? Well, in the late 17th century, England's economy was as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm, largely due to rampant counterfeiting. Coins were clipped and shaved down to almost nothing, and the economy was at risk of collapse. Enter Newton, with his meticulous nature and penchant for order, to sort out the chaos. Newton's time at the Mint was like a heist movie in reverse. Instead of stealing money, he was trying to save it. He implemented a recoinage, pulling in old, adulterated coins and replacing them with new, standardized ones. This was a massive undertaking. Imagine trying to replace the entire currency of a nation without causing mass panic or economic ruin. Newton rose to the challenge, employing his analytical skills to sniff out counterfeiters like a bloodhound on a scent. His time at the Mint turned into a game of cat and mouse, with Newton playing both roles just for kicks. But Newton, the Mint man, was still Newton the scientist at heart. While chasing down counterfeiters, was simultaneously obsessing over optics. By this time, he had already developed his theories about light and color, but his mind was far from resting. He proposed the corpuscular theory of light, which suggested that light was made up of tiny particles. This was a bold move in a world that still largely believed in the wave theory of light. Newton's theory wouldn't gain full acceptance until Einstein came along with his own theories on light many years later. But hey, if you're going to be ahead of your time, you might as well do it in style. Let's not forget the economic context in which all this unfolded. The late 17th century was a period of economic turbulence and political intrigue. England was transitioning from a monarchy to a more parliamentary system, a shift that was messier than a teenager's bedroom. The Glorious Revolution of 1688 had just established constitutional monarchy, bringing William of Orange to the throne and leaving the country teetering on the precipice of financial reform. Newton's work at the Mint was crucial not just for scientific progress, but for national stability. His efforts helped stabilize an economy in flux, demonstrating that sometimes the right brain can also manage left-brain tasks with aplomb. Newton's role at the Royal Mint was not without its dangers. Counterfeiting in those days was a capital offense, and Newton took his duties seriously, turning into a sort of proto-detective. He employed informers, conducted interrogations, and compiled meticulous records. His work led to numerous convictions, including that of the infamous counterfeiter William Challoner. Challoner, a man with a rap sheet longer than a Dickens novel, was eventually hanged for his crimes, thanks to Newton's relentless pursuit of justice. It's a testament to Newton's multifaceted genius that he could shift from contemplating the cosmos to tracking down criminals with the tenacity of a hawk. Yet, even amidst these earthly concerns, Newton never quite shook off his celestial obsessions. The allure of light and color remained, a constant thread in the tapestry of his life. He continued to refine his theories, his mind as restless as ever. In doing so, he laid the groundwork for future scientific inquiry, pushing the boundaries of what was known and challenging others to do the same. So there you have it, a glimpse into Newton's middle years, a time when he balanced his scientific pursuits with the gritty realities of public service. While he may have been reluctant to step into the role of a public servant, his impact was undeniable, proving once again that Newton was a force of nature, not just a man of science. As we pause here, know that the story is far from over. Newton's legacy continues to unfold, and there's still more to discover about the man who dared to unravel the mysteries of both the heavens and the human world. Stay tuned as we continue to explore the life of Isaac Newton, a true pioneer in every sense of the word. So, let's dive back into the whirlwind life of Isaac Newton, a man who seemed to juggle more roles than a circus performer on a tightrope. By the time he took the helm of the Royal Society in 1703, Newton was practically a one-man institution, reshaping science and society with every move. Imagine inheriting a role with all the gravitas, but none of the glamour. Welcome to Newton's presidency at the Royal Society. Now, the Royal Society was no ordinary club. It was the epicenter of scientific thought, where the brightest minds gathered to debate, discuss, and occasionally to throw down harder than a reality TV reunion. Newton, with his deep-seated need for control, was the perfect fit to steer this ship. His leadership style, let's just say it was less democratic forum and more Newton's way or the highway. He was a stickler for protocol, which, in the world of 18th century science, was like trying to herd cats with an iron fist. Newton's tenure as president was marked by significant achievements, but also by some rather colourful controversies. His most infamous clash during this period was with John Flamsteed, the astronomer royal. Flamsteed, who had been diligently cataloguing the stars, found himself in Newton's crosshairs. Newton, impatient to use Flamsteed's data for his own work, effectively strong-armed the astronomer into publishing his star charts prematurely. It was a classic case of intellectual strong-arm tactics, with Newton flexing his authority like a gym bro on a protein high. But let's not pretend Newton's time at the Royal Society was all drama and no substance. His presidency saw the publication of many important works and the advancement of scientific thought. However, it was also a period when Newton's personal eccentricities came into sharper focus. You see, the man who could unravel the universe's mysteries had a few quirks that would make even the most eccentric of characters blush. Take his diet, for instance. Newton wasn't exactly a culinary enthusiast. In fact, he was known to forget meals altogether when deep in thought. His eating habits could be summed up as subsist on the bare minimum, a regimen that would make today's intermittent fasters look like gluttons at an all-you-can-eat buffet. One anecdote tells of Newton boiling an egg while working at his desk, only to find he'd boiled his watch instead. Whether true or not, it paints a vivid picture of a mind so consumed by ideas that mundane tasks like eating took a backseat. And if you think his dietary habits were peculiar, wait until you hear about his obsession with biblical chronology. Yes, when Newton wasn't calculating the orbits of planets, he was busy trying to decode the Bible, convinced it held hidden messages and prophecies. Newton's fascination with theology was not just a hobby, it was an all-consuming passion. He wrote extensively on the subject, producing over 1 million words on biblical prophecy and chronology. In his mind, the scriptures were as ripe for exploration as the heavens themselves. It's a testament to his unyielding curiosity, even if it did veer into territory that would make even Dan Brown raise an eyebrow. Let's circle back to the legacy of his Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, or simply the Principia for those who prefer their Latin with fewer syllables. Published in 1687, the Principia was Newton's magnum opus, a dense tome that laid the groundwork for classical mechanics and redefined humanity's understanding of the natural world. It was the kind of book that transformed science from a hobby of gentleman scholars into a rigorous discipline. Think of it as the genre-defining album that turns a garage band into rock legends. The Principia introduced the world to Newton's 3 laws of motion, those cornerstones of physics that every high school student has to endure. The first law, the law of inertia, told us that objects in motion stay in motion unless acted upon by an external force, a concept as revolutionary as it was simple. The second law quantified force as mass times acceleration, slapping a neat equation on something that was previously just a vague notion. And the third law, every action has an equal and opposite reaction, might as well have been the scientific equivalent of what goes around comes around. But let's not forget the inverse square law of gravitation, a concept so groundbreaking that it made Newton's contemporaries rub their eyes in disbelief. The idea that the force between 2 masses was proportional to the product of their masses, and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them, was mind-boggling. It was the kind of insight that made others in the scientific community feel like they'd brought a knife to a gunfight. The impact of the Principia was monumental. It wasn't just a book, it was a revolution in print. It provided a framework that explained not just earthly phenomena, but celestial ones too. And while it's easy to romanticize the Principia as the ultimate triumph of reason and logic, it's worth noting that its publication was as much about political maneuvering as scientific achievement. Newton, ever the strategist, knew the right levers to pull and the right egos to soothe to ensure his work saw the light of day. Despite the Principia's brilliance, it wasn't an overnight sensation. The book was dense, filled with complex mathematics that left many a would-be reader scratching their heads and reaching for a stiff drink. It took years for its full significance to be appreciated, but when it was, It transformed Newton into a scientific icon, a status he carried with a mix of pride and the occasional touch of arrogance. Newton's knighthood in 1705 was the cherry on top of his illustrious career, an honor bestowed upon him by Queen Anne. Now, becoming Sir Isaac Newton sounds like a big deal, and it was. But let's peel back the pomp and circumstance. The knighthood was more about political optics than scientific recognition. It was a way for the crown to curry favor with the intellectual elite. While Newton appreciated the title, it didn't come with any real power or responsibilities, more like a ceremonial badge of honor than a key to the kingdom. As Newton settled into his later years, he remained as enigmatic as ever. His mind, once a cauldron of scientific inquiry, was now more often consumed by theological musings and personal reflections. Yet, his influence on science was indelible. Newton had set the stage for future generations, laying a foundation that others would build upon, challenge, and refine. His work was the springboard for the Enlightenment, a period that would see reason and science triumph over superstition and ignorance. As we wrap up this chapter of Newton's life, it's clear that his legacy is as complex as the man himself. He was a thinker who bridged worlds, from the celestial to the theological, and left an indelible mark on both. While his later years were marked by introspection and a touch of eccentricity, his contributions to science and society remained unparalleled. But fear not, dear listener, for Newton's story is not yet complete. There's still more to unravel, more to discover about the man who dared to turn the universe's mysteries into a set of elegant equations. Stay tuned as we continue to explore the life of Isaac Newton, the original rock star of science. So, as we continue unraveling Newton's story, let's discuss the legacy of a man who managed to bottle the cosmos in a set of equations, all while remaining as elusive as a cat in a physics lab. Newton's laws of motion and universal gravitation weren't just intellectual exercises. They became the bedrock upon which modern physics, and indeed much of our understanding of the world, was built. Picture them as the Rosetta Stone for science, transforming cryptic cosmic gibberish into a language we could finally understand. His first law, the law of inertia, was like a wake-up call to a world still half asleep under the spell of Aristotelian physics. Objects, Newton declared, would keep doing their own thing, moving or resting, unless some external force came along to mess with their groove. It was a moment of revelation akin to realizing your houseplants are thriving because you've stopped overwatering them. Sometimes the best action is inaction. Then there's the second law. Force equals mass times acceleration, or F equals ma for those who like their physics with a side of elegance. This equation wasn't just a scientific breakthrough. It was the moment physics got its groove back. Suddenly, the mysterious forces that moved everything from cannonballs to carriages were calculable, and thanks to Newton, we could now predict how much force was needed to achieve the desired acceleration. It was like giving humanity a cheat sheet for the universe's pop quiz. Newton's third law, the principle that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, was as profound as it was simple. It wasn't just about explaining why rockets could soar into space, or why you shouldn't punch a brick wall, spoiler. It punches back. It was a philosophical statement about the interconnectedness of actions and consequences, a cosmic reminder that every flick of a butterfly's wings has its counterbalance. These laws were the foundation stones for everything from engineering marvels to modern space travel. Without them, our rockets might still be dreamt up by poets rather than launched by physicists. Newton turned abstract concepts into practical tools, transforming science from an esoteric pursuit into a discipline with real-world applications. His work laid the groundwork for the Industrial Revolution, enabling engineers to design with precision and predictability. It's no exaggeration to say that every bridge held up, every plane that stays aloft, owes a nod to Newton's brilliance. His law of universal gravitation was perhaps the crown jewel of his scientific achievements. By proposing that the same force causing apples to fall also keeps the planets in orbit, Newton unified the heavens and the Earth with a single, elegant theory. It wasn't just a scientific breakthrough. It was a cosmic revelation that redefined humanity's place in the universe. This wasn't just thinking outside the box. Newton obliterated the box, then used its fragments to build a new framework for understanding reality. Yet, Despite his towering intellect and monumental contributions, Newton's personal life was about as harmonious as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. He never married, and his relationships with others were often fraught with tension. Newton was known for his prickly nature, a man whose genius was rivaled only by his capacity for holding grudges. His feud with Robert Hooke is the stuff of legend, but it was just one of many conflicts that darted his career like a series of unfortunate speed bumps. Ironically, the man who could unravel the mysteries of the cosmos never quite figured out his own heart. Newton's emotional life was as inscrutable as his equations were precise. He was a solitary figure, more at home with his thoughts and theories than with the messiness of human relationships. Perhaps it was this very detachment that allowed him to see the universe in such clear terms. After all, when you're busy contemplating the forces that bind the stars, the subtleties of human interaction might seem less significant. Newton's legacy is a testament to the power of the human mind to transcend its limitations. He wasn't just a product of his time. He was a force that shaped it. His work didn't just change science. It changed the way we think about the world and our place in it. Newton's laws became the lingua franca of physics, influencing generations of scientists and thinkers. His ideas transcended borders and cultures, a universal language that spoke to the curious minds of every era. And while Newton's life was marked by personal eccentricities and professional rivalries, his contributions to science and society remain unparalleled. He was a man who dared to peek behind the curtain of the universe and reveal the machinery of the cosmos. His work laid the foundation for the Enlightenment, a period that saw reason and science triumph over superstition and ignorance. Newton wasn't just a scientist. He was a pioneer, a visionary who dared to dream beyond the confines of his time. As we wrap up this exploration of Newton's life, it's clear that his legacy is as complex as the man himself. He was a thinker who bridged worlds, from the celestial to the theological, and left an indelible mark on both. While his later years were marked by introspection and a touch of eccentricity, his contributions to science and society remained unparalleled. Newton's story is a reminder that sometimes the most profound truths are found not in the stars, but in the quiet moments of contemplation that follow. As we bid farewell to Sir Isaac Newton, it's clear that his legacy will continue to inspire and challenge us for generations to come. In the Grand Theatre of ancient China around 1046 BCE, the Shang dynasty was hobbling along like an overworked mule in a three-legged race. The economy, a mess. Political stability, non-existent. It was a textbook case of a civilization doing the cha-cha on the edge of a cliff. The Shang kings were notorious for their lavish spending, like a teenager with a credit card and no concept of a budget. They burned through resources at an alarming rate, throwing extravagant parties and building colossal tombs that rivaled small cities. Meanwhile, their subjects were left to scavenge for scraps, wondering whether their leaders were more adept at governance or hosting ancient raves. Enter the Zhou, a scrappy clan from the west, eyeing the Shang's power like a brand-new sports car with a for sale sign slapped on it. King Wu, the Zhou leader, surveyed the Shang's crumbling empire and saw an opportunity akin to a real estate investor spotting a fix-and-flip gold mine in a derelict neighborhood. The Zhou weren't just ambitious, they were downright savvy. They knew that the Shang's decadence was their Achilles heel, and they planned to exploit it with precision. The Battle of Mui was where the Zhou put their plan into action. Picture this. King Wu, the Zhou underdog, facing off against the Shang's King Zhou. Yes, confusingly, the same name, because ancient Chinese history loves to keep us on our toes. The Zhou army was lean and mean, composed of 45,000 troops, a number that might not seem overwhelming today, but was the equivalent of bringing a bazooka to a knife fight back then. In contrast, the Shang, despite their resources, fielded a larger but less motivated force, including thousands of slaves who were probably more interested in freedom than fighting. On the day of the battle, the Zhou soldiers, armed with superior bronze weapons and a killer instinct honed from years of living on the fringes, made short work of the Shang forces. It was like watching a well-oiled machine dismantle a dilapidated contraption held together by duct tape and wishful thinking. The Shang dynasty, with its dazzling but impractical luxuries, simply couldn't withstand the Zhou's focused determination and military discipline. But let's not get too swept away by the romantic notion of the Zhou as noble liberators. Sure, they preached the mandate of heaven, claiming divine endorsement for their rule, but that was as much about spin as substance. The truth is, the Zhou were opportunists par excellence, seizing their moment with the kind of timing that would make even the slickest politician envious. And so, the Shang's reign came to a dramatic end, not with a whimper, but with the resounding clang of bronze and the shouts of Zhou warriors declaring a new order. The Zhou didn't just take over Shang territory, they flipped it like a savvy investor, restructuring the political landscape and laying the groundwork for what would become one of China's longest-lasting dynasties. The moral of the story: never underestimate the power of ambition married to opportunity, especially when your rivals are too busy partying to notice their empire's foundations crumbling beneath them. With the Shang dynasty, now a historical footnote, the Zhou found themselves the new landlords of a sprawling empire. And like any savvy new homeowner with a fixer-upper, they got right down to business with renovations. But instead of new paint and a few throw pillows, the Zhou's makeover involved a revolutionary feudal system that would make even the most seasoned political analysts sit up and take notice. Now, before you roll your eyes at the word feudal and start thinking of knights and castles, let's clarify a bit. This wasn't your typical medieval setup. The Zhou's approach was more about strategic land distribution and less about jousting tournaments. They chopped up their newly acquired territory into chunks and handed them out to loyal family members and allies. Think of it as a more sophisticated version of Monopoly, where instead of Park Place and Boardwalk, you had provinces and fiefdoms. And the best part, this system wasn't just a power play, it was an economic masterstroke. By giving local rulers control over land, the Zhou ensured that each region had a vested interest in its prosperity. Economic incentive meet political stability. But why stop at a land grab when you can also launch a killer PR campaign? Enter the mandate of heaven, the Zhou's ingenious piece of divine marketing. The basic idea was simple. Heaven had given them the thumbs up to rule, effectively turning their takeover into a celestial endorsement. And let's be real, who wouldn't want to be on heaven's good side? But before we get too starry-eyed, let's remember that this divine mandate was less about deities and more about spin. The Zhou weren't just rulers. They were ancient China's version of marketing moguls, brilliantly selling the story that their victory was a cosmic inevitability. Of course, the whole chosen by heaven narrative was about as verifiable as a celebrity's Instagram followers. But in a time when omen's importance were all the rage, it was a masterstroke of public relations. People wanted to believe in a higher order, a reason behind the chaos of dynastic change. And the Zhou, they were more than happy to provide that comforting narrative. It was as if they'd tapped into the ancient version of a social media influencer campaign, leveraging faith and belief to cement their rule. Meanwhile, back on the ground, the Zhou's feudal system was doing precisely what it was designed to do, stabilizing the empire from the ground up. Local lords, or Zhou, given the task of governing their territories, collecting taxes and raising troops. In return, they got to keep a portion of the wealth and wield power in the name of the Zhou king. It was the ultimate, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours scenario, with the added bonus of creating a network of loyalty that stretched across the land. But let's not overlook the practical genius of this setup. By decentralizing power, the Zhou avoided the pitfalls that had tripped up the Shang, namely, the tendency to concentrate wealth and authority in the hands of a few. The Zhou system was more egalitarian, at least by the standards of the time, and it set the stage for a long-lasting dynasty. With landowners motivated to keep their plots productive and peaceful, the Zhou managed to create a kind of early Chinese economic miracle. Yet, all this success wasn't just about clever economics and savvy storytelling. The Zhou also understood the importance of cultural continuity. They adopted many Shang customs and rituals, blending them with their own to create a new, hybrid culture. This wasn't just about paying lip service to tradition. It was a calculated move to win over the hearts and minds of the people. After all, the last thing they wanted was a populace pining for the good old days of Shang rule. By incorporating Shang elements into their own culture, the Zhou effectively bridged the gap between the past and the future. In the end, while the Zhou might have claimed divine right, their real power lay in strategic thinking and adaptability. They weren't just conquerors. They were architects of a new world order, one that balanced innovation with tradition. So, the next time someone talks about the mandate of heaven, remember that it was as much about earthly wisdom as it was about celestial approval. The Zhou understood that sometimes, to win over the people, you've got to give them a story they can believe in, even if it means getting a little creative with the truth. And so, with land parceled out like ancient real estate, and the heavens seemingly on their side, the Zhou dynasty began its reign. But as any ruler knows, keeping power is often trickier than seizing it. The Zhou had laid a solid foundation, but the challenges of maintaining such a vast and diverse empire loomed large on the horizon. Stay tuned, because the story of the Zhou is far from over, and as history has shown, even the mightiest of dynasties can find themselves on shaky ground if they're not careful. The Zhou dynasty, fresh from its victorious takeover, looked at its sprawling empire like a kid who's just unwrapped a giant jigsaw puzzle, excited, but perhaps a bit overwhelmed. After all, ruling China wasn't just a matter of sitting on a fancy throne and issuing proclamations. It required deft management and a keen understanding of human nature. And oh boy, did the Zhou have their work cut out for them. First up on their to-do list, managing a territory that was about as easy to control as a herd of cats on roller skates. The Zhou's lands stretched from modern-day Beijing in the north to the Yangtze River in the south, a distance comparable to walking from New York City to Orlando, without the theme parks and with a lot more mountains. This meant that communication wasn't just a hassle, it was a logistical nightmare. Messages had to be carried by foot or horseback, often taking weeks to reach their destination. It was like running a multinational corporation with dial-up internet. And then there was the issue of local governance. The Zhou's feudal system, while innovative, was also a Pandora's box of potential problems. Handing out lands to family members and allies seemed like a great idea until those same allies started acting like mini-kings themselves. Imagine a board of directors where every member has their own agenda, their own resources, and most importantly, their own armies. It's like Game of Thrones, but with more rice paddies and fewer dragons. Take, for instance, the Duke of Zhou, King Wu's brother, who became the poster child for both loyalty and intrigue. When King Wu died, his young son, King Cheng, was too green to rule. Enter Uncle Zhou, who stepped in as a regent. On the surface, it seemed like a noble act of familial duty. But behind the scenes, whispers of power grabs and coups d'etat buzzed like flies around a summer picnic. The Duke had to fend off accusations that he was plotting to oust his nephew, a claim that he denied with all the sincerity of a politician caught in a scandal. However, the Duke of Zhou was no schemer. He was a stabilizer. He quelled rebellions, reasserted Zhou authority, and even codified rites and ceremonies to legitimize the Zhou rule. But his actions set a precedent that would haunt the dynasty, the notion that power was up for grabs if you were clever or ruthless enough to seize it. Speaking of power grabs, let's talk about the regional lords, or Zhou. These guys were like the franchise owners of the Zhou's imperial enterprise, and they knew the value of their loyalty. As they became more entrenched in their local territories, their power grew, and so did their ambitions. They started to resemble those modern-day corporate giants who get so big that they can challenge the government itself. Consider the state of Kai, one of the Zhou's most significant vassals. Its ruler, Duke Huan of Kai, was like the Steve Jobs of ancient China, innovative, influential, and occasionally insufferable. Under his leadership, Kai became a powerhouse, using strategic alliances, economic reforms, and military might to expand its influence. Duke Huan even hosted the first recorded interstate conferences, which sounds a lot like a UN meeting, but with more swordplay. And herein lay the problem. The more these lords expanded their power, the more they started to question why they should answer to a distant king. It was like when a regional manager starts wondering why they're taking orders from a CEO they've never met. The Zhou kings, ensconced in their capital at Heijing, were increasingly like absentee landlords, relying on the goodwill of their vassals to maintain control. But not all was doom and gloom. The Zhou court was a hotbed of cultural and intellectual activity. Think of it as the Silicon Valley of ancient China, where philosophers and scholars gathered to exchange ideas and influence the society's direction. Confucius, although a few centuries down the line, would later look back at this period as a golden age of virtue and governance. Of course, The reality was less idyllic, with constant power struggles and territorial disputes. But hey, who doesn't like a good bit of nostalgia? Yet, the Zhou's innovative feudal system was both their greatest strength and their Achilles heel. It provided a framework for local governance and economic growth, but it also sowed the seeds for future fragmentation. As regional lords grew in power, they started to see themselves less as subjects of the Zhou and more as independent rulers. It was a classic case of the empire striking back. Only this time, it was the provinces doing the striking. The Zhou dynasty had built an empire on the principles of loyalty and mutual benefit, but as time wore on, the cracks began to show. The challenges of managing such a vast territory were mounting, and the Zhou kings were finding it increasingly difficult to keep their lords in check. It was like trying to herd cats while juggling flaming torches. Impressive if you can pull it off, but catastrophic if you drop the ball. As we move forward in this saga, remember that the Zhou, with all their grand plans and divine mandates, were ultimately human. They had ambitions, made mistakes, and faced challenges that resonate with us even today. Whether it was political intrigue or familial squabbles, the Zhou dynasty was a living, breathing soap opera, full of twists, turns, and the occasional cliffhanger. And as history marches on, we'll see just how these internal dynamics set the stage for the next act in China's epic story. Stay tuned, because the Zhou's tale is far from over, and things are about to get even more interesting. But as the Zhou dynasty marched forward, their grand ambitions began to hit the proverbial speed bumps, more like potholes, actually, of history. The Zhou, those early adopters of the feudal system, soon found their clever innovation was less a golden ticket and more a ticking time bomb. Their empire was sprawling, yes, but control. That was a different beast entirely, and it was starting to get a little feral. As if managing an empire wasn't hard enough. In 771 BCE, the Zhou got an unwelcome surprise party from the Quanrong tribes. Picture the scene. A ragtag band of fierce warriors from the west, crashing through the borders with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop. The Quanrong were no strangers to these territorial shindigs. They've been eyeing the Zhou lands with the kind of intent that says, "We like what you've done with the place. Mind if we take over?" And take over they did, sacking the Zhou capital of Heijing like it was Black Friday, and everything was 90% off. This invasion was a seismic event, not just because it toppled the Zhou's western capital, but because it laid bare the dynasty's vulnerabilities. The Zhou kings, once the starry-eyed visionaries with divine endorsements, were now looking more like beleaguered managers who'd lost control of their franchises. The Quanrong's invasion was a harsh wake-up call, the kind that makes you realize your security system is more decorative than functional. Let's not sugarcoat it. The Zhou's leadership was up a creek without a paddle. King Yu, the reigning monarch at the time, was about as effective as a chocolate teapot. His reign was marked by poor decisions and a knack for stirring up trouble, like when he replaced his queen to appease his new favorite, the notorious Bao Si. This wasn't just a bad case of midlife crisis. It was a political blunder that alienated powerful allies and weakened his grip on power. King Yu's decision-making skills could have used a serious upgrade, maybe something from the Confucian school of hard knocks. And here's the kicker. Bao Si, his new queen, wasn't exactly the poster child for stability. Legend has it she had a laugh as rare as a solar eclipse. In a move that would make any PR team cringe, King Yu tried to elicit one by lighting the signal fires meant to summon his vassals for a fake emergency. When the lords arrived, ready to defend the realm, only to find a royal punchline instead, let's just say they were less than amused. The moral of the story: never cry wolf for a laugh, especially when your kingdom is on the line. With the capital in ruins and the king's credibility in tatters, the Zhou dynasty was forced to beat a strategic retreat eastward, setting up a new capital at Luoyang. If the Western Zhou era was the dynasty's build-up, then this move marked the start of its sequel, the Eastern Zhou period, a time when the central authority was as fragmented as a shattered vase. The irony: the Zhou's retreat eastward only highlighted the decentralization that their own feudal system had exacerbated. It was a bit like trying to herd a flock of sheep with a megaphone from 2 counties away. Economically, the Zhou were feeling the pinch too. The cost of maintaining an empire, especially one with a now questionable mandate, was mounting faster than you could say deficit spending. The local lords, who were supposed to be the backbone of the Zhou's economic strategy, had begun to act like independent operators with their own interests at heart. They were more interested in building up their territories than sending tribute to a distant king whose power was increasingly symbolic. It was a classic case of robbing Peter to pay Paul. Only Peter was the central government, and Paul was whoever could muster the most troops. The romantic notion of a unified Zhou dynasty, ruling with heavenly grace, was giving way to a more fragmented reality. The dynasty was less a cohesive empire and more a patchwork quilt of semi-independent states, each with its own agenda. The political landscape resembled a jigsaw puzzle where none of the pieces quite fit, and some were missing altogether. It was a power structure that made sense on paper, but was unraveling in practice. In fairness, the Zhou struggles weren't just about poor leadership or economic strains. They were also about the shifting sands of Chinese society itself. As the regional lords grew stronger, they began to cultivate their own cultures and societies, effectively laying the groundwork for what would become the Warring States period. This was a time when the question was not just who should rule, but how they should do it. The seeds of philosophical thought that would later blossom into Confucianism and Taoism were being planted amid the chaos. So, as the Zhou dynasty stumbled through these turbulent times, the stage was set for a period of intense intellectual and cultural development. The Zhou were learning the hard way that staying on top required more than just divine endorsement and a few clever innovations. It required adaptability, vision, and perhaps most crucially, the ability to keep your allies close and your enemies closer. As the dynasty limped into its next chapter, the lessons of their decline would echo through the ages, leaving a rich legacy of cautionary tales and hard-earned wisdom. Stay tuned, because the Zhou saga is far from over, and the next act promises even more intrigue and transformation. And so, the Zhou dynasty found itself limping into the Eastern Zhou period, a time when the crown's authority was about as sturdy as a paper umbrella in a monsoon. The once mighty Zhou kings, who had orchestrated the overthrow of the Shang with all the finesse of a master chess player, were now reduced to ceremonial figureheads. It was like watching a rock star reduced to playing cover songs at a dive bar. The real power had shifted to the states, those regional lords who once played second fiddle, but now conducted their own symphonies of power and ambition. The Zhou kings, once the undisputed rulers of a vast empire, had become little more than ceremonial mascots, trotted out for rituals and public occasions with the enthusiasm usually reserved for a tax audit. Their capital at Luoyang was no longer the bustling heart of the dynasty, but more like a historical theme park, where the past glories of the Western Zhou were displayed like artifacts in a museum. The Zhou kings still wore the crown, but it was a crown without a kingdom, a relic of a bygone era when their word was law. Meanwhile, the real action was happening in the States. The Eastern Zhou period was a time of remarkable change and development, even if the Zhou kings were more like bystanders than participants. The regional lords, or Zhou, had transformed from loyal subjects into potentates in their own right, each with their own agendas and ambitions. It was a bit like the Wild West, but with more silk robes and fewer cowboy hats. The states began to innovate in governance, economy, and military strategy, setting the stage for the Warring States period, where the real drama of Chinese history would unfold. Economically, the Eastern Zhou period was a time of significant growth and transformation. The states, eager to outdo one another, became hotbeds of innovation. Agricultural techniques improved, iron tools and weapons became widespread, and trade flourished. This wasn't just about keeping up with the neighbors. It was about setting the pace in a rapidly changing world. The Zhou kings, meanwhile, were left to watch as their once unified empire splintered into a collection of powerhouses, each with its own economic policies and priorities. It was like trying to manage a sprawling corporation where the regional managers had all decided to start their own startups. Politically, the Eastern Zhou was a period of experimentation and evolution. The states experimented with new forms of governance, some leaning toward more centralized power, others embracing a more decentralized approach. The Zhou kings might have been sidelined, but the cultural and political innovations of this period were laying the groundwork for future Chinese civilization. Confucianism, Taoism, and other philosophical schools emerged, offering new ways of thinking about society, governance, and the individual's role within it. It was a time of intellectual ferment, like a renaissance before the Renaissance, where ideas flowed as freely as the Yellow River. And let's not forget the myth-busting reality. The Zhou kings, once touted as the divinely appointed rulers of all under heaven, were now more like ceremonial props in a grand play that was being rewritten by the states. The mandate of heaven, once their ace in the hole, had become an open-ended question, one that the regional lords were eager to answer in their favor. The Zhou dynasty's transition from rulers to figureheads might sound like a fall from grace, but it was also a testament to their enduring legacy. They had laid the foundation for a Chinese civilization that would outlive them, a civilization that would continue to evolve and adapt long after the Zhou kings had become footnotes in history. So as we wrap up this saga of the Zhou dynasty, let's remember that history often glamorizes the victors, those who conquer and rule with an iron fist. But the Zhou story reminds us that it's the survivors who truly write the next chapter. They might not have ended their days in the splendor they once knew, but they left an indelible mark on Chinese civilization. Their innovations in governance and culture, their ability to adapt and transform, ensured their legacy would endure long after their political power had faded. In the end, the Zhou dynasty story is a testament to the resilience of human ambition and the enduring power of ideas. After all, history might be written by the winners, but it's the survivors who get to tell the tale. Your morning begins with the sharp crack of a radio broadcast. It's June 22, 1941, and the world's about to change in ways you never imagined. Germany has just launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history, and the Soviet Union is its target. Picture 3. 8 million Axis soldiers, 350 tanks, and a fleet of 770 aircraft, surging across a front that stretches 900 kilometers. That's like driving from Paris to Moscow with a few detours through chaos and destruction. The Blitzkrieg blitzes across the border like it's got a personal vendetta, and before you can say Molotov cocktail, the Wehrmacht is closing in on Leningrad. Why Leningrad, you ask? It's not just any city. It's a symbol of Soviet industrial might and cultural prestige. Knock it out, and you don't just get a strategic victory, you get a psychological one. Plus, it's the namesake of Lenin himself, and that's a prize any Axis power would love mounted on their mantle. Now, let's talk about Operation Barbarossa. Named after a medieval Holy Roman Emperor because why not throw a historical Easter egg into the mix? This operation was Hitler's not-so-subtle way of saying, I want living space. The Führer was convinced that the Soviets would collapse like a house of cards, especially since Stalin had done him the favor of purging his own military leadership during the Great Purge. Who needs enemies when you're your own worst foe, right? In the early hours of Barbarossa, the Luftwaffe decimates the Soviet Air Force while it's still on the ground, literally caught napping. Within the first week, 600 Soviet soldiers are captured, and Soviet defenses seem about as effective as a paper umbrella in a monsoon. The Soviet Union is in disarray, and it's a scramble of epic proportions. Stalin's initial response is a mix of disbelief and rage, but mostly disbelief. He'd even ignored multiple intelligence warnings because, in his book, trusting anyone is for suckers. As the Wehrmacht blitzes across Soviet territories, Leningrad becomes a high-stakes target. It's not just its position that makes it valuable. It's the jewel of Soviet industry. Picture this. Leningrad churns out nearly 11% of the Soviet Union's industrial output, including a hefty chunk of its armaments. If you're in the business of war, that's a city you want under your thumb. Plus, losing Leningrad would be a propaganda disaster for Stalin, and Hitler knows it. The city itself is gearing up for a fight. The residents of Leningrad, led by Mayor Pyotr Popkov, are turning every available resource towards defense. They dig trenches, fortify buildings, and even rip up decorative iron fences to be melted down for weapons. It's a citywide DIY project with the grim understanding that failure isn't an option. Meanwhile, the Soviet military command is playing a high-stakes game of chess, trying to anticipate the Wehrmacht's next move while dealing with a severe shortage of experienced officers thanks to Stalin's paranoia. As the German forces barrel towards Leningrad, the Soviet government declares a state of siege. It's official. The city is cut off from the rest of the country, a sitting duck waiting for the hunter's next move. The Germans, under the command of Wilhelm von Lieb, encircle the city. But instead of storming in guns blazing, they opt for starvation as their weapon of choice. The plan is to squeeze the life out of Leningrad like a boa constrictor with all the time in the world. Now, here's where things get a bit surreal. Despite the looming threat, life in Leningrad carries on. The city's famous Kirov ballet still performs, and the Philharmonic Orchestra plays on. It's a classic case of fiddling while Rome burns, except this is Leningrad, and the whole world's on fire. The legendary composer Dmitri Shostakovich is even working on his 7th symphony, a musical middle finger to the invading forces. But beneath the surface, the reality is stark. Supplies are dwindling fast, and rationing becomes the new normal. Bread, the staple of life, is doled out in meager portions, barely enough to keep a sparrow alive, let alone a human. Yet, in the face of encroaching doom, the city's spirit is unyielding. It's this blend of stubborn resilience and cultural defiance that makes Leningrad a symbol of Soviet endurance. As you stand at the crossroads of history, the air is thick with tension, and the city's indefatigable will to survive. With every passing day, the siege tightens, but so does the resolve of its people. And you, caught in the eye of this historical storm, are about to witness one of the most extraordinary sagas of human endurance ever chronicled. This is just the beginning of a long, grueling chapter in the annals of history. The encirclement is complete, and with Leningrad cut off, the city transforms into a massive cauldron of human endurance and suffering. By September 1941, it's official. Leningrad is now a city under siege, with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. German and Finnish forces have drawn a tight noose, and it's not the kind of necktie you'd wear to a fancy dinner. The isolation is profound, not just geographically, but psychologically. Imagine being trapped in your own city, where every street corner is a reminder of what used to be normal life. The rationing system kicks in with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Bread rations drop to a staggering 125 grams per day for non-manual workers by November. That's about the weight of a smartphone. So, if you're thinking a sandwich might be in order, think again. It's more like a crumbwich. The nutritional value, let's just say it's more filler than flour, with bits of sawdust thrown in for that extra crunch. You might laugh at the absurdity if it weren't so desperately tragic. The city's initial coping strategies are a masterclass in resourcefulness and desperation. People dismantle wooden structures, furniture, and anything remotely flammable to keep warm as the temperature plunges to a bone-chilling -30 degrees C. That's colder than a polar bear's handshake. The harsh winter of 1941-1942 isn't just a season, it's a merciless adversary. The once bustling Neva River freezes over, turning into a silent, icy ribbon slicing through the heart of a city, trying not to freeze in time. Psychologically, the siege plays a cruel game with the minds of Leningrad's residents. The isolation gnaws at the edges of sanity, like a relentless rodent. News from the outside world is sparse, and rumors spread faster than a cold in a kindergarten. Some cling to the hope that the Red Army will break through, while others aren't so optimistic, watching the dwindling food supplies with growing dread. The city is cut off from its usual lifelines, but also from the simple comforts of human connection and the reassurance of normalcy. Then there's the infamous Road of Life, the only tenuous supply route across the frozen Lake Ladoga. It's the city's fragile umbilical cord to the rest of the Soviet Union, a precarious path that's fraught with danger and, ironically, life-saving potential. Convoys of trucks brave the thin ice, skirting the razor's edge between salvation and disaster. It's a logistical nightmare, but it's also a lifeline, albeit one that's constantly threatened by German artillery and the vagaries of weather. In this bleak tableau, the human spirit shows remarkable tenacity. Families share what little they have, neighbors support each other, and an unlikely sense of community emerges. It's a testament to human resilience, the kind of thing that makes you want to cheer for the underdog, even as you recognize the staggering odds stacked against them. Yet, the myth of Leningrad's unbreakable spirit is tempered by the grim reality. People are dying by the thousands from starvation, exposure, and disease. By the end of the siege, nearly 1 million civilians will have perished, a chilling statistic that underscores the brutal cost of survival. Stories of ingenuity abound. There's the tale of the blockade garden, where residents cultivate vegetables in any available patch of dirt, proving that necessity is indeed the mother of invention. It's a stark contrast to the romantic notion of wartime heroics. This is survival stripped to its raw essentials, with a side of wilted cabbage. The cultural life continues, albeit with a Sama undertone. Shostakovich's Symphony No. 7, aptly dubbed the Leningrad Symphony, premieres in the beleaguered city. It's a defiant blast of music that echoes through the freezing halls, a sonic reminder that the city's heart still beats. As the months grind on, the psychological impact intensifies. The isolation breeds a unique kind of despair, one that's compounded by the gnawing hunger and relentless cold. It's the kind of desolation that seeps into your bones, making each day a battle for not just survival, but sanity. People cling to small rituals, the familiar routines that tether them to the shreds of a former life. Yet, amidst the darkness, there are glimmers of humanity's enduring spirit, acts of kindness, shared laughter in the face of adversity, and a collective resolve that refuses to be extinguished. It's a complex tapestry of human experience, woven with threads of hope and despair, resilience and resignation. Leningrad is more than a city under siege. It's a testament to the unyielding grit of its people, a narrative that defies easy categorization. So, here you are, standing in the shadow of history's relentless march. The siege of Leningrad is far from over, and the harshest trials are still to come. But for now, in this moment, the city stands defiant, a symbol of resistance against overwhelming odds. As the winter winds howl and the ice tightens its grip, the people of Leningrad brace for what lies ahead, their resolve as unyielding as the frozen earth beneath their feet. So, here we are, knee-deep in the relentless winter of 1941-42, with Leningrad citizens caught in a daily struggle that makes a marathon look like a leisurely stroll in the park. The calendar flips from one bleak month to the next, but the misery remains constant. Now, let's dive deep into the nitty-gritty of survival in a city where hope seems to be rationed out more sparingly than bread. Speaking of bread, let's talk carbs. By December 1941, the daily bread ration for workers was cut to a meager 250 grams, about 2 slices of your typical loaf. Non-workers, including children and the elderly, got even less. Imagine trying to fuel a day's work with what amounts to a small sandwich, minus the fillings. The bread itself was a Frankenstein's monster of ingredients, sawdust, cellulose, and whatever else could be ground into flour. It was less a loaf and more a brick in disguise. Calories were the new currency, and everyone was living in nutritional bankruptcy. The official ration provided a laughable 600 calories a day, when the average adult needs at least 2,000 just to keep the lights on. It's no wonder the black market thrived, with a kilo of flour fetching a king's ransom. People sold their valuables for a few precious bites, trading family heirlooms for the kind of sustenance that most of us would swipe left on. And then there's the cold. Oh, the bone-chilling, soul-sapping cold. With temperatures plummeting to minus 30 degrees C, it was the kind of weather that made even penguins rethink their life choices. The city's infrastructure was as frozen as the citizens' fingers, with central heating systems failing spectacularly. People burned whatever they could find, furniture, books, even the very floorboards of their homes, to heat their apartments. If you've ever cursed the cost of heating, spare a thought for Leningraders who literally burned their history to keep warm. Yet, amidst the frostbite and famine, the infamous road of life became a beacon of hope, albeit a precarious one. This icy lifeline across Lake Ladoga was the city's only connection to the outside world, a 30-kilometer stretch that defied both nature and Nazi artillery. Convoys of trucks, heavily loaded and hardly roadworthy, crept across the treacherous ice, bringing in supplies and evacuating the vulnerable. It was a high-stakes ballet of logistics, with drivers navigating cracks in the ice and dodging enemy fire like it was all part of some twisted game show. The scale of suffering was monumental. Official statistics estimate that around 800,000 people perished during the siege, most succumbing to starvation and cold. That's nearly a third of the city's pre-siege population. It's hard to wrap your head around numbers like that, but it underscores the brutal reality of life in a city that was both a fortress and a prison. Yet, for all this horror, the myth of Leningrad's endurance holds a certain allure. It's the stuff of legends, the romantic notion of a city that refused to kneel. But let's not sugarcoat it with nostalgia. The reality was grim. People were driven to desperate acts. Cannibalism was not unheard of, a ghastly testament to the depths of human despair. It's a stark reminder that survival often strips away the veneer of civilization, leaving only the raw, unvarnished will to live. Despite everything, the city's spirit flickered stubbornly. Cultural life persisted, a defiant act of normalcy in a world gone mad. The Leningrad Symphony, played in the besieged city, wasn't just music. It was a rallying cry, a declaration that the city's soul was unbreakable. It was broadcast on loudspeakers aimed at the German lines, a sonic middle finger to the besiegers. And then there was the ingenuity born of necessity. Residents grew vegetables in makeshift gardens, crafting green oases in the midst of a concrete jungle. It was urban farming before it was trendy, a testament to human resilience in the face of relentless adversity. These small acts of defiance were the glue that held the city together, a patchwork of hope stitched into the fabric of everyday life. As the siege dragged on, the psychological toll became a constant companion, gnawing away at the edges of sanity. The isolation was suffocating, an invisible fog that seeped into every corner of life. News from the outside world was scarce, and rumors filled the void like static on a broken radio. Hope was a volatile commodity, fluctuating with each whisper of impending relief or further doom. Yet, in this cauldron of suffering, humanity shone through in unexpected ways. Acts of kindness, though small, were profound. A stranger sharing their meager food ration, a neighbor offering warmth in a cold world. These gestures were the threads that wove the tapestry of survival, a reminder that even in the darkest times, the light of human compassion flickers on. As we stand here, peering into the past, it's clear that the siege of Leningrad was more than just a military event. It was a crucible of human endurance, an epic tale of survival against unimaginable odds. The city's defiance was both legendary and brutally real, a testament to the strength and frailty of the human spirit. But remember, the story isn't over yet. Leningrad still stands, its people bracing for the trials yet to come. The winds of history continue to howl, but the city remains unbowed, a symbol of unyielding resilience frozen in time. So here we are, smack in the middle of a city that's both a living nightmare and a historical legend, clutching at cultural lifelines while the world outside howls in chaos. If you're wondering how a city under siege keeps its spirit from crumbling like stale bread, look no further than the power of music and propaganda. Spoiler, it's not all symphonies and slogans. But first, let's cue the dramatic overture. Enter Dmitri Shostakovich, a man whose name is as much a mouthful as his music is a soul-stirrer. In the midst of this frozen tableau of despair, Shostakovich composes his Seventh Symphony, aptly known as the Leningrad Symphony. It's not just a bunch of notes strung together. It's a defiant roar from a city refusing to be silenced. Premiered in Leningrad in August 1942, the symphony saw musicians playing in freezing conditions, surviving on rations that would make a mouse feel famished. The performance was broadcast over loudspeakers, aimed right at the German lines. Take that, Wehrmacht. But let's not get too swept away by the romance. While Shostakovich's symphony is an enduring symbol of resistance, it's also a piece of Soviet propaganda with a crescendo that's loud enough to drown out any dissent. The Soviet regime was all about optics. Morale had to be maintained, even if reality was biting harder than winter frost. Despite the romantic notion of unity, the truth was grimmer. In the words of a contemporary Leningrader, we were all together, but we were all alone. Now, let's talk about the Soviet propaganda machine, which was like a well-oiled, albeit slightly rusty, cog in the war effort. The government churned out posters, pamphlets, and radio broadcasts, painting a picture of heroic resilience. Never mind the fact that people were eating soup made from boiled wallpaper paste, because starch is a food group now. Propaganda was the band-aid slapped over the gaping wound of reality, a narrative spun tighter than a ballerina's bun. While the myth of unwavering Soviet unity plays well in history books, the day-to-day reality was far from a picture of collective harmony. The truth is, survival often pits the individual against the collective. Starvation has a funny way of making people more self-interested than a cat with a laser pointer. Stories abound of petty theft and betrayal, neighbors turning on each other over a crust of bread. It's a stark reminder that while propaganda paints in broad strokes, the human experience is a patchwork of contradictions. Yet, amidst this bleak landscape, the people of Leningrad adapted with a resilience that would make even the hardiest cockroach look like a quitter. They didn't just sit around waiting for miracles. They got creative. The blockade gardens, those pockets of green amid grey, were a testament to this ingenuity. Residents grew vegetables in every available patch of dirt, proving that in Leningrad, even the soil knew how to resist. Speaking of resisting, let's not forget the economic context. The siege turned Leningrad's economy into a twisted game of Monopoly, where food was boardwalk and everyone was bankrupt. Bartering became the norm. People traded anything and everything, clothes, jewelry, even labor, for a few precious calories. It was capitalism at its most primal, driven by the unyielding laws of supply and demand. You want bread. Better have something to trade, or get ready to dig deep, literally, into your attic for anything of value. Meanwhile, the Soviet government kept its eyes on the prize, which in this case was Leningrad's continued resistance. The city was more than a strategic location. It was a symbol. Losing it would be a propaganda disaster of epic proportions. So, while residents endured the unendurable, the regime cranked out tales of valor and sacrifice, crafting a narrative of unity that glossed over the rough edges of reality. For the people on the ground, survival was a balancing act between hope and despair. The road of life continued its perilous dance across the frozen Lake Ladoga, a lifeline fraught with danger but vital for the city's survival. The trucks were loaded with supplies on the way in and dreams of escape on the way out, each journey a gamble against the elements and enemy fire. It was a testament to human tenacity, a reminder of what people will endure when the stakes are nothing less than life itself. But let's not kid ourselves. The myth of Leningrad's indomitable spirit is tempered by the harsh realities faced daily. The city's unity was more about necessity than choice. Hunger is a brutal equalizer, and when every day is a fight for survival, high ideals often take a backseat to basic human needs. The siege exposed fault lines in Soviet society, revealing cracks beneath the facade of collective strength. Yet, for all the myth-busting, there's an undeniable allure to the story of Leningrad. It's the stuff of legends, a narrative woven with threads of resilience and defiance. The cultural and political efforts to maintain morale were as much about survival as they were about resistance. In the end, it's a story of humanity in the face of inhumanity, a testament to the enduring spirit of a city that refused to fall. As we stand on this historical precipice, the story is far from over. Leningrad's struggle continues, an epic saga of endurance that will unfold with each passing day. The winds of history are relentless, but the city's resolve is unbroken, a beacon of resilience in a world gone mad. So, as we pause to catch our breath in this unfolding narrative, remember, the heart of Leningrad still beats, defiant and unyielding, as the siege grinds on. As we stand on this historical precipice, the story is far from over. Leningrad's struggle continues, an epic saga of endurance that will unfold with each passing day. The winds of history are relentless, but the city's resolve is unbroken, a beacon of resilience in a world gone mad. So, as we pause to catch our breath in this unfolding narrative, remember, the heart of Leningrad still beats, defiant and unyielding, as the siege grinds on. Fast forward to January 27, 1944. After 872 days of what can only be described as the world's most grueling endurance test, the siege of Leningrad is finally lifted. Imagine a collective sigh of relief so profound it could probably be heard echoing off the walls of the Kremlin itself. The Red Army's efforts to break the German encirclement reach a crescendo, forcing the besieging forces to retreat and leaving behind a trail of devastation, both physical and emotional. Over 1 million civilians have perished, an unthinkable loss that's not just a number but a staggering human cost. The lifting of the siege is celebrated with fireworks, a rare burst of color in a city that's seen more grey than a rainy day in London. But let's not get too carried away by the fireworks. The reality on the ground is still grim. Leningrad is a shadow of its former self, a city where entire families have vanished, and the survivors are left to grapple with the aftermath. The population has been decimated, shrinking from around 3 million before the siege to just over 600,000. That's a reduction more drastic than a Hollywood starlet's crash diet. Economically, Leningrad is a disaster zone. Industry is at a standstill, infrastructure is in ruins, and the cost of rebuilding is as daunting as climbing Everest in flip-flops. The Soviet government is quick to trumpet the city's resilience, but economic recovery will be a long, arduous process. It's a classic case of victory at a cost that makes you wonder if it was worth the price of admission. The city's strategic industries, crucial to the Soviet war effort, have to be painstakingly revived, adding yet another layer to the Herculean task of reconstruction. The legacy of the siege is a complex tapestry, a mix of myth and reality that defies easy categorization. On one hand, Leningrad becomes a symbol of Soviet endurance, a shining example of a city that refused to kneel. The romantic narrative paints it as a heroic saga of collective resilience, a testament to the indomitable spirit of its people. It's the kind of story that inspires poems, songs, and countless propaganda posters. Yet, the reality is far less poetic. The siege laid bare the harshest truths about human nature, the desperation, the betrayals, and the unimaginable choices forced upon ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. There's no denying the allure of the Leningrad myth. It's a David versus Goliath story, a tale of survival that resonates with the primal human spirit. But let's not forget that behind every legend lies a foundation of brutal facts. The human cost was immense, and the psychological scars ran deep. For many survivors, the end of the siege was just the beginning of another battle, coping with the trauma of what they had endured. The city's cultural life, once a vibrant tapestry of music and art, is marred by the memories of a time when survival was the only form of resistance. The political implications of the siege are equally significant. For Stalin and the Soviet regime, Leningrad's endurance is a propaganda goldmine, a narrative that reinforces the image of Soviet strength and unity. The city's resilience is touted as proof of the superiority of the Soviet system, conveniently glossing over the immense suffering and the regime's own failures in preparing for the siege. It's a classic case of history being written by the victors, where inconvenient truths are swept under the rug and the narrative is polished to a high shine. Yet, for the people of Leningrad, the siege is more than just a historical footnote. It's a part of their identity, a shared experience that binds them together in ways that outsiders can scarcely comprehend. The stories of ingenuity, like the blockade gardens and the makeshift heating solutions, become part of the city's folklore, a testament to the creativity and tenacity of its inhabitants. The cultural life, too, is a pillar of the city's legacy, with Shostakovich's Leningrad Symphony remaining a symbol of defiance long after the guns have fallen silent. In the end, the siege of Leningrad is a story of contradictions, a narrative that's as much about resilience as it is about the fragility of human life. It's a tale of survival against unimaginable odds, a reminder that even in the darkest times, the human spirit has an uncanny ability to endure. As we close the chapter on this harrowing saga, it's clear that the legacy of Leningrad is not just one of defiance, but of the heavy price paid by its people. The city stands as a testament to both the best and worst of humanity, a symbol of resilience forged in the crucible of unimaginable hardship. So, as we step back from this historical journey, let's remember the lessons of Leningrad. It's a story that defies easy conclusions, a narrative that challenges us to confront the complexities of human endurance. The siege may have ended, but its legacy endures, a poignant reminder of the strength and frailty of the human spirit. And as we look to the future, let's carry forward the resilience of Leningrad, a beacon of hope in a world that, even today, often seems all too willing to embrace the darkness. In the grand, dusty theater of ancient history, the Assyrians strutted onto the stage like a rock band with a penchant for conquest. Forget the romanticized histories that paint Mesopotamia as all ziggurats and hanging gardens. The Assyrians were proof that the region was a hotbed of strategic cunning and military innovation. The place to be if you had a taste for empire building and a high tolerance for the occasional beheading. So, where did these hardcore Mesopotamian MVPs come from? Well, it all began in Asher, a city-state that hugged the banks of the Tigris River like it was clinging to a lifeline. Geographically speaking, the Assyrians hit the jackpot. Nestled in the northern part of modern-day Iraq, Asher was smack dab in the middle of key trade routes. It was the ancient version of a highway rest stop, but instead of dodgy coffee and overpriced snacks, you had caravans loaded with lapis lazuli and exotic spices. Now, you might think that being in the middle of a bustling trade network would mean the Assyrians were destined for a life of peace and prosperity. Not quite. Peace was so last millennium. The Assyrians had a more, shall we say, aggressive business model. They turned warfare into a high-stakes game of Monopoly, where the goal was to own every single square on the board, or in their case, every patch of fertile land from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf. The early Assyrians took a page out of the playbook of survival of the fittest. They weren't just traders, they were warriors, and they developed a military machine that was as efficient as it was ruthless. We're talking about the guys who made siege warfare cool before the Greeks even thought about inventing democracy. Their innovations in military tactics were like ancient cheat codes, battering rams, siege towers, and the kind of archery that would make Robin Hood weep with inadequacy. In fact, one of their greatest hits was the use of iron weaponry. While their neighbors were busy bashing each other with bronze, the Assyrians were forging ahead with iron swords and spears, essentially bringing a gun to a knife fight. This technological edge meant that by 900 BCE, they were not just players in the Mesopotamian Game of Thrones, they were the reigning champions. But let's pump the brakes a bit and dive into the whys and hows of their military genius. The Assyrians were nothing if not pragmatic. Early on, they realized that if you wanted something done right, you had to do it yourself, or at least train your army to a level of near perfection. They developed a standing army that was well organized and disciplined, a stark contrast to the ragtag groups of conscripted farmers their enemies were fielding. This was a full-time job for them, and they were darn good at it. The Assyrians also had this delightful habit of using psychological warfare. They understood that nothing says submit or else quite like a well-timed display of brutality. Their PR campaigns involved plastering city walls with reliefs of their military exploits, showing off their latest conquests in a sort of ancient Instagram feed, only with fewer filters and more violence. These visual boasts were as much about intimidating foes as they were about rallying their own people. Now, it's tempting to look at the Assyrians and see only the blood and guts, but that would be missing the bigger picture. Sure, they were as subtle as a chariot at full speed, but their empire building wasn't just about swinging swords. It was about creating a legacy, a sprawling network of cities and roads that connected the known world in a way that was unheard of at the time. Economically, the Assyrians were like the ancient version of a tech startup that disrupted the market. They leveraged their geographic location to control trade routes, essentially creating a toll system that would make modern highway authorities green with envy. This economic might funded their military campaigns, which in turn secured more territory and resources, creating a self-sustaining cycle of conquest and commerce. The Assyrians were no strangers to innovation, and not just on the battlefield. They were pioneers in administration, developing a complex bureaucracy to manage their growing empire. They used cuneiform tablets to keep meticulous records, which was probably as fun as watching paint dry, but crucial for keeping the wheels of empire turning smoothly. These records are a treasure trove for historians, offering glimpses into everything from tax collections to diplomatic correspondence. But let's not sugarcoat it. The Assyrians had a flair for the dramatic when it came to dealing with dissent. Rebelling against Assyrian rule was a bit like poking a bear with a stick, ill-advised, to say the least. Their reputation for ruthlessness was not entirely undeserved. Cities that dared to defy them could expect a visit from the Assyrian army, after which they would either be brought to heel or wiped off the map. This zero-tolerance policy for rebellion was effective, if not exactly endearing. While their methods might seem harsh by today's standards, in the context of the ancient world, they were playing by the rules of the game. The Assyrians weren't just warmongers. They were strategists who understood that power was not just about capturing territory, but about holding it. And hold it they did, with an iron grip that would make even the most aggressive modern corporate raider blush. So, as we wrap up this first act in the epic saga of the Assyrian Empire, remember that these warriors of Mesopotamia were more than just the sum of their conquests. They were innovators, traders, and yes, conquerors, who carved out an empire in the harsh landscape of the ancient world. As we follow their rise, keep in mind that every empire has its zenith and its nadir, and for the Assyrians, the ride was only just beginning. And so, our story barrels forward like an Assyrian chariot at full tilt, skidding into the era of Tiglath-Pileser Roman III, a name that sounds like a mouthful but strikes fear into the heart of the ancient world. It's 745 BCE, and this guy isn't just playing the empire game. He's rewriting the rulebook. Think of him as the Steve Jobs of Assyrian expansion, minus the turtleneck, but with a penchant for military conquest instead. Tiglath-Pileser Roman III, or TP3 for those who prefer brevity, had big dreams and an even bigger army. His reign marked the zenith of Assyrian power, and he wasn't about to let bureaucracy or borders stand in his way. The man was a master of aggressive expansion policies, carving out an empire that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf. Under his leadership, the Assyrian Empire was like a juggernaut, and anyone in its path was about to learn that resistance was not just futile, it was downright suicidal. But TP3 didn't just rely on overwhelming force. He was a tactical genius who turned the Assyrian military machine into a finely oiled engine of war. The secret sauce: iron weaponry and chariot warfare. While his adversaries were still clunking around with bronze, TP3 forces were decked out in iron, the ancient equivalent of swapping out your flip phone for the latest smartphone. This was cutting-edge tech for the time, and it gave the Assyrians an edge sharper than their swords. The Assyrian chariot was a marvel of engineering, a two-wheeled terror that could turn the tide of battle faster than you can say flanking maneuver. These chariots weren't just fancy taxis. They were platforms for archers to rain down arrows with deadly precision. Imagine a cavalry charge, only with the added bonus of a mobile artillery unit. This combination of speed and firepower made the Assyrian army a force to be reckoned with, and TP3 knew how to wield it with devastating effect. But let's take a breather from the battlefield and peek behind the curtain at the empire's administrative prowess. The Assyrians were not just about brawn. They had brains to match. Their bureaucratic system was a marvel of organization, managing to keep tabs on an empire that spanned thousands of miles and dozens of cultures. They had a network of governors and officials who would put modern-day bureaucrats to shame with their efficiency and attention to detail. The Assyrians used cuneiform tablets to track everything from grain harvests to tax collections, creating a paper trail, clay trail, that would make even the most diligent accountant nod in approval. These records were like the ancient world's version of a database, allowing the empire to function like a well-oiled machine. The bureaucracy wasn't just about keeping the lights on. It was a tool of control, ensuring that the Assyrian grip on power remained firm. But let's not get too misty-eyed about this ancient civil service. The Assyrian administration was as much about coercion as it was about governance. They had a system of deportations that would relocate entire populations, a strategy designed to break the spirit of conquered peoples and integrate them into the empire. This wasn't just a case of moving the chess pieces around. It was a calculated move to prevent rebellion and ensure loyalty. Speaking of loyalty, the Assyrians were masters of propaganda, and TP3 was no exception. The myth of the merciless Assyrian warrior wasn't just born out of their military exploits. It was carefully cultivated through a campaign of psychological warfare that made sure everyone knew who was in charge. Reliefs and inscriptions touted their victories and the dire fates of those who dared oppose them, turning fear into a tool of statecraft. But here's the kicker. While the Assyrians were undoubtedly fierce, the image of them as bloodthirsty savages is more propaganda than reality. Sure, they had their moments of brutality, but they were also diplomats and traders who understood that empire building wasn't just about swinging swords. It was about creating a network of alliances and economic ties that would bind their territories together. The Assyrians might have been the ancient equivalent of a corporate raider, but beneath the steel and swagger was a keen understanding of the complexities of power. They knew that an empire was only as strong as its weakest link, and they worked tirelessly to ensure that every piece of their vast domain was firmly in place. Their administrative genius was not just about maintaining order. It was about creating a legacy that would endure long after the last chariot had rolled into the sunset. As we leave TP3 in the throes of his imperial exploits, it's worth remembering that the Assyrian Empire was more than just a collection of conquests. It was a tapestry of cultures and peoples, stitched together by the twin threads of iron and innovation. And while the Assyrian warrior might loom large in the annals of history, it was the empire's ability to adapt and evolve that truly set it apart. But hold on to your helmets, because the story's not over yet. There's more to explore in this saga of ambition and administration, and the road ahead is as winding as the Tigris itself. So stay tuned as we continue to unravel the tangled web of history, one conquest at a time. As we meander further into the Assyrian chronicle, let's make a pit stop in Nineveh, the empire's crown jewel, where ambition and artistry collided like an ancient blockbuster. At its peak, Nineveh wasn't just a city, it was the Met Gala of Mesopotamia, a place where power wore its Sunday best every day of the week. This wasn't a town built on subtlety. No, it was a testament to the Assyrian penchant for grandiosity, with architecture that screamed, "Behold our greatness," and "Tremble." First up, the palaces. The Assyrians weren't content with modest dwellings. They constructed sprawling complexes that would make Versailles look like a starter home. Take the southwest palace of Sennacherib, built around 700 BCE. This wasn't just any palace. It was an estate boasting over 80 rooms, and rumor has it the walls were adorned with reliefs depicting the king's conquests. Imagine walking through a hallway where every step is flanked by scenes of vanquished foes and triumphant returns. It's like an ancient action movie frozen in clay. But the piece de resistance was the library of Ashurbanipal. Forget dusty tomes. We're talking about a repository of knowledge that housed over 30,000 cuneiform tablets. Ashurbanipal, who ruled from 668 to 627 BCE, was the geek king with an insatiable thirst for knowledge. He collected texts on everything from literature to medicine to astronomy, essentially creating the ancient world's Encyclopedia Britannica. The library was not only a symbol of intellectual prowess, but also a tool of cultural hegemony, ensuring that Assyrian thought dominated the scholarly scene. Of course, all this opulence wasn't just for show. It served a strategic purpose. The Assyrians understood the power of visual intimidation. Their architecture was a not-so-subtle reminder to visitors and subjects alike that they were in the presence of an empire that didn't just conquer land, but also mastered the fine art of flexing its cultural muscles. These structures were propaganda writ large in mud brick and stone, a way of saying, "We built this city, and we can unbuild yours." Yet, beneath this glittering facade lay the gritty realities of empire. Running an empire wasn't cheap, and someone had to foot the bill. Enter the economic challenges that lurked like potholes on the road to imperial glory. The Assyrians were experts at squeezing every last drop of wealth from their territories. Taxation was the lifeblood of their economy, and it came in various flavors: tributes from subjugated states, agricultural levies, and of course, the ever-popular labor tax. Yes, forced labor was the Assyrian version of a summer internship, minus the resume boost. Entire populations were put to work on state projects, from constructing palaces and temples to maintaining irrigation systems. This wasn't just about exploiting manpower. It was a calculated move to keep potential rebels too busy and too tired to revolt. But let's not sugarcoat it. These projects often required back-breaking toil under the watchful eyes of overseers who weren't exactly known for their gentility. Social tensions were as palpable as the heat in a Mesopotamian summer. While the elite indulged in the spoils of conquest, the common folk bore the brunt of imperial ambition. Revolts were a constant threat, simmering beneath the surface like a pot on the verge of boiling over. The Assyrian response, a mixture of carrot and stick, or rather, more stick than carrot. The empire maintained its grip through a combination of military might and administrative savvy, quelling uprisings with the same ruthlessness they exhibited on the battlefield. Yet, for all their iron-fisted control, the Assyrians were not immune to the very forces they sought to manipulate. The economic demands of sustaining such a vast empire were immense, and the strain began to show. As resources were stretched thin and social discontent brewed, the empire faced challenges that no amount of reliefs or palatial majesty could mask. So, what's the verdict? The Assyrians were masters of spectacle and strategy, but like all empires, they were built on a foundation of contradictions. An empire defined as much by its cultural achievements as by the tensions that threatened to unravel it from within. As we continue our journey through the annals of Assyrian history, remember that beneath the grandeur and the glory lay the relentless grind of an empire juggling ambition with reality. Stay tuned as we navigate the labyrinth of Assyrian legacy, where every corner reveals both the splendor and the shadows of a civilization that dared to dream big. And so, as we delve deeper into the Assyrian tale, we find ourselves at a crossroads, a moment when the empire, once as unyielding as iron, began to feel the cracks beneath its shiny exterior. Picture an aging rock star who's still trying to belt out power ballads while the stage beneath him starts to crumble. The Assyrian Empire, at its peak, had all the hallmarks of a superpower: an unbeatable army, a sprawling network of trade routes, and a penchant for grandiose architecture. But like any empire worth its salt, it had its Achilles heel: overextension. Now, overextension isn't just a fancy word you might use to describe your credit card bill after a shopping spree. For the Assyrians, it was the harsh reality of managing a territory that stretched over 500,000 square miles at its height. This was no small feat in a world where the fastest communication was a dude on a horse. As the Assyrians gobbled up land from Egypt to the Persian Gulf, they found themselves juggling a myriad of cultures and languages, each with its own set of problems and rebellious tendencies. Let's zoom in on the year 626 BCE, a time when internal strife was brewing like a storm over the horizon. Ashurbanipal, the last of the great Assyrian kings, had shuffled off this mortal coil, leaving a power vacuum bigger than the Tigris River. His successors, less rock star and more garage band, they struggled to keep the empire's unwieldy machine running smoothly. The central authority began to erode, and the once dreaded Assyrian administration was starting to look like a game of telephone gone horribly wrong. The empire's internal challenges were compounded by external pressures. Enter the Babylonians, stage left, with a swagger and a growing ambition. Under the leadership of Nabopolassar, these former vassals of Assyria started to flex their muscles, much like a teenager who's just realized they can take the car keys for a spin. By 612 BCE, the Babylonians had allied with the Medes, another thorn in Assyria's side, and together they aimed to topple the Assyrian giant. One of the key battles that signaled the beginning of the end was the siege of Nineveh in 612 BCE. This wasn't just a skirmish. It was a full-blown assault on the heart of the Assyrian Empire. The attackers were like a relentless wave, crashing against a cliff that had stood for centuries. The Babylonians and Medes, fueled by a cocktail of ambition and resentment, laid waste to the city. It's said that Nineveh was so thoroughly sacked that it took explorers centuries to find its ruins beneath the sands. Talk about leaving no stone unturned. As the smoke cleared from Nineveh, it was obvious that the Assyrian Empire was on life support. But what caused the fall? Was it simply the brute force of Babylonian and Median armies? Not entirely. The Assyrians had built their empire on the backs of fear and control, but when they overextended, their subjects saw an opportunity to rebel. It was like watching a domino effect in slow motion, one rebellion inciting another until the whole structure came crashing down. Drawing parallels to modern superpowers, the Assyrian experience is a cautionary tale about the dangers of biting off more than you can chew. Whether it's an empire or a multinational corporation, the lesson is clear. Sometimes, expanding too fast means you don't notice the cracks until it's too late. The Assyrians found themselves spread thin, both militarily and administratively, unable to manage the growing list of challenges that came their way. Economically, the Assyrian model was straining under the weight of its own ambitions. The costs of maintaining a standing army, funding public works, and keeping a massive bureaucracy humming were astronomical. The empire had always relied heavily on the tributes and taxes from conquered peoples, but as those territories slipped away, so too did the cash flow. It was like trying to keep a luxury car running on fumes. And while the Assyrians had been masters of propaganda, their image of invincibility began to crumble. The myth of the merciless Assyrian warrior was no longer enough to keep rebellion at bay. People, it turns out, can be surprisingly bad at staying subjugated when they see a chance for freedom. The psychological warfare that had once cowed cities into submission was losing its edge. As the Assyrians faltered, the Babylonians rose with the kind of gusto that would make a phoenix blush. Nabopolassar's son, the famous Nebuchadnezzar Roman II, would go on to establish Babylon as a cultural and political powerhouse, giving us those oh-so-romantic hanging gardens and a new chapter in Mesopotamian history. But that's a tale for another time. For now, let's not sugarcoat it. The Assyrian Empire's fall was as dramatic as its rise. It was a classic case of a giant brought low by its own weight. The world watched as the once mighty Assyrians were reduced to a memory, their once feared armies scattered, and their grand cities left to the sands of time. But don't pack away your history books just yet. There's more to this saga as we continue to unravel the threads of Assyrian legacy and their indelible mark on history. Stay tuned as we delve into the aftermath of their fall and the echoes of their empire in the annals of time. As we pick up the pieces from the wreckage of Nineveh, it's easy to see why the fall of the Assyrian Empire feels like the climax of a Shakespearean tragedy. Picture the scene: a once unstoppable force, brought to its knees by a potent cocktail of internal decay and external aggression. The year is 612 BCE, and the Assyrians' grand finale is anything but subtle, a pyrotechnic display of hubris gone awry. But before we close the curtain on this ancient drama, let's sift through the ashes to unearth the lessons and legacies that the Assyrians left behind. First, a word on hubris, that age-old nemesis of empires everywhere. The Assyrians, for all their military prowess and administrative finesse, were not immune to the seductive lure of overconfidence. They believed their empire was invincible, a belief that blinded them to the storm gathering on the horizon. It's a tale as old as time. Power breeds arrogance, and arrogance sows the seeds of downfall. This isn't just an ancient problem, it's a timeless cautionary tale that resonates even today. In the modern world, where superpowers juggle global influence like a circus act, the Assyrian experience serves as a stark reminder that no empire, no matter how mighty, is immune to the forces of change. Now, let's talk about the cyclical nature of empires, a concept as comforting as it is unsettling. History is a bit like a broken record. It tends to repeat itself. The Assyrians were not the first to build an empire on the backs of conquest and control, nor were they the last. Fast forward through the annals of time, and you'll find echoes of their story in the rise and fall of Rome, the Mongol Empire, and even the British Empire. Each rose to dizzying heights only to stumble, often due to the same pitfalls: overextension, economic strain, and the rebellion of those they sought to subjugate. But before we get too philosophical, let's zero in on the practical side of things. The Assyrians were the ancient world's military innovators, turning warfare into an art form long before Sun Tzu penned The Art of War. Their tactics and technologies, from the use of iron weaponry to the strategic deployment of siege engines, set the stage for future military engagements. Their discipline and organization became the blueprint for armies centuries later. So, next time you see a military parade, give a nod to the Assyrians, who were strutting their stuff on the battlefield long before it was cool. Their contributions weren't limited to the art of war. The Assyrian administrative system laid the groundwork for governance models that endure today. They developed a centralized bureaucracy that managed to keep tabs on a sprawling empire. No small feat, considering the lack of Google Docs. Their use of cuneiform for record-keeping was the precursor to modern data management, and their postal system was a forerunner to the speedy delivery services we rely on today. In a world where information is power, the Assyrians were ahead of the curve, ensuring that their empire operated like a well-oiled machine. And let's not forget their cultural legacy. While the Assyrians are often remembered for their ferocity, they were also patrons of the arts and literature. The library of Ashurbanipal, with its treasure trove of knowledge, was a beacon of intellectual curiosity in a world dominated by might. It's a testament to the Assyrian belief in the power of knowledge, a belief that resonates in our age of information. They understood that culture and education were as essential to empire building as fortresses and armies. As we wrap up this whirlwind tour of Assyrian history, let's take a moment to reflect on their lasting impact. The Assyrians were a paradox, both brutal conquerors and cultured rulers, and their story is a vibrant tapestry woven with threads of ambition, innovation, and yes, a fair share of bloodshed. Their rise and fall offer a window into the complexities of human nature and the relentless march of history. So, What's the takeaway for us modern folk, sipping our lattes and scrolling through endless feeds? The Assyrians remind us that power is fleeting, and the real measure of an empire, or a person, is not just in the conquest, but in the legacy left behind. They teach us that innovation and adaptation are key to surviving the capricious whims of fortune, and that knowledge is as potent a weapon as any sword. In the end, the Assyrian Empire is more than just a chapter in the dusty tomes of history. It's a mirror reflecting our own aspirations and follies, a reminder that while the players may change, the game of empire building remains as timeless as ever. So as we close the book on this saga, remember, history isn't just about the past. It's a guide to the present and a map to the future. Stay curious, keep questioning, and never underestimate the power of a good story. After all, in the grand theater of history, we're all just actors playing our part.